22nd, 2011 budget hearing to order. If you will please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco.
Here.
Hotchkiss. Here. House. Rouse. Self. Here. White. Mayor Schneider.
Here. Are there any items not on today's agenda? I don't see any speaker slips.
Nope.
No. Okay, so we're moving on to the budget hearing, and I believe we're starting with Mr. Casey.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Paul Casey, Assistant City Administrator and also Community Development Director. Today we're going to go over the Community Development Department's budget first, and then after us you have the Library Department budget presentation as well. What we'd like to do is try to get through the entire department presentation for you at once. Rather than breaking up into general fund and redevelopment, we'd recommend that the staff just kind of go through and get all the presentation out of the way. We know there's a number of people who are here who want to speak and want to make sure that they have an opportunity to come up and talk as well, and that's probably on the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force item, and so we'd like to
so we'll have public comment before the Library Department hearing, so you don't have to stay for the whole budget hearing, but just for that department. Okay.
Great, thank you. So we'll do the general fund first, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Bossi to do the redevelopment agency, CDBG, and rental housing mediation task force. First on the department, this is just an org chart of our department with the main functions. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, but it's 14 programs, 4 funds, and approximately 75 full-time equivalent staff members in the department. The summary of the total budget, when you include the redevelopment agency as part of our department overview, it kind of dwarfs the rest of the agency, rest of the department. So you see the redevelopment agency has about $20 million in revenue, and then the general fund is the other major source with about $10 million of revenue. So we'll start first on the general fund portion of the department, which, looking at the same organization chart, you can see it covers the arts, planning, economic development, and just a small part of the human services portion of the housing and redevelopment division, and building and safety. So it's everything except for this column for the most part. And you'll see down at the bottom, we'll talk about it more, part of our recommendation this fiscal year is to eliminate the staff hearing officer, environmental review, and training section of the planning division as kind of our continued need to be shrinking the size of the organization. We'll talk about why a little bit later. Just a very brief overview about what it is we do in the general fund portion of the department. In planning, we do development environmental review, zoning, design review, historic preservation, long-range planning. And then building and safety is the other primary portion of the general fund department with the inspections and records and plan check. And then we have kind of ancillary issues of we provide the funding to the County Arts Commission to fund our arts advisory program and the human services program. Just a little more detail on planning. It's a fairly complex division. It's not, when you think of planning, you may think of one simple thing of just reviewing large development projects, but we're doing a lot of different stuff within the planning division to meet the community's needs. Within development review, we certainly are reviewing those development applications, doing the environmental reviews, staffing the planning commission and the staff hearing officer, and doing other permit services. In zoning, we're doing the zoning enforcement, although it's been reduced substantially, staffing the public counter, doing zoning information reports and plan check. In design review, we're providing all the support to the 3 main design review commissions, the Architectural Board of Review, Historic Landmarks Commission, Single Family Design Review Board. We're also doing historic preservation efforts and permit services. Long-range planning focus clearly has been on Plan Santa Barbara over the last few years, and going forward would be implementing that. Updating the housing element, safety element, state-required climate action plan as well. And then planning administration side, doing the noticing for the meetings, the agendas and the minutes, and support to the overall division. Within building and safety, pretty straightforward and pretty typical with other jurisdictions that do building and safety. You have code enforcement, inspection of construction projects, conduct building investigations, doing the plan check and project plan review for projects to make sure they're being built to the state codes and being designed and constructed in a safe manner. Permit services, building code information, staff the building counter, and then the records and archives, kind of keeping all the historical database of development projects in the community. And then on the administration side, It's the miscellaneous catch-all. And one of the issues I just wanted to highlight here is, we've kind of become the de facto homeless issues services provider staffing for the city, even though that has not historically been our role, and we don't really have a position budgeted for that. My administrative services officer, which we've had administrative services officer, is now Sue Gray, and because she had some knowledge and expertise, she's kind of taken on that responsibility, and it's taken up a considerable amount of her time these days, in addition to her existing requirements that she has in her job. And then our human services staff, Deirdre Randolph and her staff, try to pick up some slack there as well, because they help coordinate the human service grants process, and so they have kind of a working knowledge of the nonprofits in town. But we do not and have not historically ever had any dedicated staff to provide support to the homeless issues, and so that's just kind of sucking up a lot of the resources we have on an ad hoc as needed basis right now. Budget changes over the last few years. These are some charts that Mr. Samario has presented to you, so I just want to highlight our department. We've cut back about $1.5 million out of our general fund budget since 2009. So that's a pretty substantial amount and one of the higher amounts for departments in the city. And then our general fund subsidy. This is something we've had a real focus on, of kind of trying to reduce the subsidy for our department, because we do get fees for planning services for a good amount of what we do, and we are trying to be full cost recovery on the building and safety side, so we're fully supported. And we've reduced about $1 million of that general fund subsidy over the last 3 years since 2009, close to $1 million, or about 18% reduction. And so we've I think, been responsive to the needs of the times to be reducing the size of the organization and community development. Just real quickly, these are kind of the standard pie charts. Again, you can see the planning and building and safety are the largest entities and have the reflective staffing level at that regard. And then appropriations, as with other departments like us, we're primarily people. We're a people providing, service providing department. And so about 75% of our costs are for salaries and benefits. And so that limits our flexibility if we need to reduce our budget, that it really becomes a staffing issue. We've really trimmed everything else to the extent that we can. And then over that time, since 2009, we've gone from 72 positions down to about 60, or a 17% reduction in staffing. In particular, in planning, we've gone from 40 staff members in the planning division to 34 recommended in the upcoming year. It's a reduction of about 15%. Sends us back to a level about the later mid-1990s, which is interesting because that's about the time I came on board. And it was an effort of the City Council to improve the excellence in customer service and land development team. And one of the identified constraints that the community was saying and the council was hearing was the need to be staffing up the planning division to help support the development review process and to improve the development review process. So we're back to a staffing level of where we kind of started from, and yet at the same time we've added more process too. We now have a single family design review board. We review a lot more single family design projects than we did back in the mid-late 1990s. We do a lot more noticing for design review projects, which creates process and interest in projects and more staff time. So we've added kind of layers of process since the 1990s, but we're heading back to a staffing level that we had at that time as well. Building and safety, we've gone from 28 to 22 positions, a reduction of about 21%. We've been successful at scaling back the staff support in building and safety with what is understandably a slowdown in construction activity. I've got a chart in just a second that shows that construction activity has slowed down, but it hasn't fallen off the face of the earth. There still is activity going on. We have about 75 projects in our plan check queue, which is trending towards the higher side. I think we like to see 50 to 60 projects in the plan check queue. So we're pleased on the one hand that the activity's there, but we're starting to kind of push that efficiency level of being able to turn those plan checks around in a timely manner, and so we watch that carefully. On the revenue side, we have two recommendations for revenues this year. One is to raise the planning fees by 5%, except for zoning information reports and appeals. We threw out an idea of increasing appeal fees last year, and there was not support to go forward, so we're not recommending to change that. We have, for the last 8 or 9 years, been trying to consistently raise planning fees so we reduce the amount of subsidy of the general fund for our planning development review process. And so Whereas, it's not the greatest time to be raising fees. We want to kind of keep chunking away at that. We've had a goal of trying to get to at least a 50% recovery level on our planning fees. Our kind of thumbnail analysis is that maybe we're nearing the 40% recovery level, and so we still got a little ways to go, and so we want to kind of keep plugging away at that with a 5% fee. We think we're still fairly competitive with other jurisdictions. One of the unique things about us is that we're a flat fee. When you talk to the development community, they really appreciate that. A lot of jurisdictions charge on an hourly basis. You make a deposit, and then you just get a new bill every month as your project gets reviewed. As you meet with neighborhood activists or other interested parties, you get a bill for that. And so we've talked to a number of the people who do a lot of development around the South Coast, and they say they like the flat fee approach, such that while our fees are starting to get up there in cost, they still feel it's a fair deal for the amount of process we go through. We're doing our revenue projections based on a 2-year average. It's always hard to project revenue when you have such uncertainty in the development climate. The last 2 years have certainly been slower years than the mid-2000s, so we think that that's a more realistic expectation going forward. And so that we're actually seeing a drop in projected revenue on the planning side when you factor in kind of our 2-year average, even with the 5% fee increase. Building and safety fees, we did not recommend any changes last year to the building and safety fees. And so this year we're also recommending a 5% fee increase. Again, full cost recovery in building and safety, so we're just trying to keep up with our ongoing costs in that regard. So there's no general fund subsidy required to support our building and safety services. Also based on a 2-year average, it comes out to be slightly more than what we've projected in fiscal year 11, but not by a lot. We've done, I think, a good job of projecting our building and safety revenues over the last couple of years with such uncertainty that we still have come in over our reduced targets for the last couple fiscal years. We kind of adjusted them down, and then our reality came in slightly better than what we had been budgeting for. So how do we balance this year? For the most part, departments were giving what was kind of called a status quo budget. We still had issues, though, that we needed to address in community development. We had a shortfall due to some use of one-time measures last fiscal year, as well as that revenue kind of game with the planning revenues coming in under, such that we still had to come up with reductions or changes to our budget of about $211,000. So we still have some work to do this fiscal year. And the way we're balancing is we are proposing to eliminate a part-time senior planner out of the planning division when that position becomes vacant upon someone leaving the city expected in August. And so we projected about 9 months of salary savings and not replacing that. That person is Deborah Ondolaro. She's been a fabulous long-term employee and senior planner, so we're sorry to see her go. And we're going to lose some good institutional knowledge and real planning professional input from her. But to try to meet this $200,000, we're not planning on replacing that position. And that's part of that staff hearing officer section that we're kind of unraveling that we created about 4 or 5 years ago. The housing element's still not done. Based upon council's direction as part of Plan Santa Barbara, we think there's going to be additional work to get that in condition to be approved by the state. So the redevelopment agency is going to cover some of the staff cost going into wrapping that up. We've done this for a few years in which a building inspector has worked half-time in water resources and public works, which gives us some salary savings. It's worked out to the great benefit of both public works and ourselves, and so we're continuing that for an additional year. We're doing some administration of some grants and able to get some money from that. The Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Grant covers the administrative cost, and so Sue Gray is being covered with that grant portion there, and that helps us balance. Building and safety revenues, as I mentioned before, go up just a little bit. We have a safety element grant that we were able to get a good chunk of money to help prepare an update to our safety element, and so we're able to have some grant monies from that. And then our graphic designer, we bill out to some of the enterprise funds and are able to charge her time to the enterprise funds, which reduces the general fund amount. So when you add all those up, that gets us to our balancing of about $211,000. So the impacts of that. One is the staff hearing officer environmental review and training section. This was a section we created about 4 years ago for 2 reasons. One was to consolidate the environmental review in one section, and the other was to do better in-house training. One of the criticisms we get all the time is make sure staff is consistent in the information they're handing out at the counter and consistent when they're at design review boards so that applicants aren't getting mixed messages and the community's not getting mixed messages. So we really wanted to put an emphasis on doing more in-house training to build that up. And unfortunately, that's just one of the things that we're not going to be able to do as good a job going forward. And that's just the reality of where we're at. So we're eliminating the senior planner position. We're reassigning the staff to the other sections. If you look to the budget document, that's why some of the sections costs seem to be going up from last year to this year, and that's because we're reassigning some existing staff. We will lose some CEQA experience and depth. We will lose some of that in-house training, but the overall expenditure savings is about $75,000 from making that effort. The cumulative impacts over the past couple of years, we've mentioned this before. Clearly, a reduction in zoning enforcement is taking a hit, and so it's not as optimum as we'd like. Reduction in customer service at the planning counter, just as we try to staff all the boards and commissions and the counter and everything else we do, that takes a little bit hit. We're going to continue the temporary suspension of the sign committee. We hear from the former sign committee members, or they still are sign committee members, when are we getting the sign committee back? They're really worried about losing that on a long-term basis, but at this point we just can't support moving that sign committee back into action. And then continued suspension of the stipends for the boards and commissions except for the planning commission. And we did hear from the other board and commissions kind of concerned about the loss of stipends. They feel they're doing a lot of work as volunteers and they'd like to be recognized for that. But we kind of share with them the political realities of where we are from a budget standpoint. Some of the other impacts on ordinance projects, both kind of semi-active and pending. You know, we always have kind of this list of things we'd like to go do at an ordinance level, and it's just taking us longer to get to them. Mission Canyon specific plan, we are working with the county staff on an update to that. We're doing some work on the historic program, districting and guidelines with our historic design staff. It's not as quickly, I think, as a lot of us would like to see. Environmental procedures and initial study revisions, these are kind of good practices to help streamline our process we're trying to improve. But then stuff we're not getting to, organization of our policies, solar awards, the new 5-foot variable setback that has come up in some of the appeals on Chapala Street that we'd like to get to. We haven't been able to. Vacation rentals is kind of an issue that's hanging out there. You know, what are we doing? We're collecting the bed tax on them, but technically they're not allowed in our zoning ordinance, and so we do enforcement on a complaint basis, but should we take that on and kind of have that discussion about how do we want to move forward with vacation rentals. Hedge ordinance is another one where we've just suspended the enforcement and kind of punted the decision about updating our hedge ordinance until we can find the time to get at that issue. We are trying to move forward with some ordinance changes to simplify the process with our reduced staffing. We did change the zoning information reports to being optional for condominiums. We got that done. That was good. We did amend the sign ordinance and the suspension of the sign committee. That was good. We're still trying to work on some clarification on standards. You know, we're working with a really old zoning ordinance document, so anytime we can kind of try to freshen it up to reality and make it consistent and clarify some standards, it helps you then in implementing it as you go forward. We're trying to update the environmental review procedures before Ms. Hondelaro leaves. So this has been an effort in front of the Planning Commission and trying to help that out. And then, you know, we did get feedback from the board and commission members as we took our budget around, and they understand kind of where we're at. They're concerned about any additional actions that might come. They don't like losing the sign committee. They like the staff support they get at the boards and commissions, and so we're just kind of grappling with that with them. And then just some key performance objectives on the general fund, then I'll wrap up and we'll turn over to the other parts of the department. Some stuff that's, you know, we don't hear about quite so much. We are participating in a nationwide arts and economic impact study with Jenny Brush and the County Arts Commission. So that's some innovative and interesting work that's going on there. As I mentioned before, we're staffing the homeless subcommittee and all the kind of ancillary issues that are going on with respond to that. We continue to respond to 100% of construction inspection requests on the day that they're scheduled. And that's really important from customer service, that contractors in the field want to keep their projects moving. So when they call for an inspection, they want us to be there. And we've seen a real improvement in the zoning information report process. You know, last year we had the realtors here concerned about how we were performing, wanting to consider maybe taking it over from the city. And we said, you know, let us have a chance to try to reform that process and make it work better. And so we're getting 90% of our zoning information reports done within 3 days, which is up from 75% just a couple years ago. So I think that we've seen some improvement there. That's been good. Not doing condominiums was a smart move and made sense there as well.
Excuse me, Paul, when you say done within 3 days, Is that 3 days of request or what? Zoning ZIRs there.
Within from within 3 days in the inspection, meaning so when we go out and meet the realtor on the site, do the evaluation, then we get back and we write the letter up and we're done within 3 days.
Great.
And we still have active projects, you know. There's still activity going on in the planning and construction world. And these are just a sample of some of the larger ones that, you know, most likely you're going to be seeing on appeals as well. And so they're still coming. Val Verde just got appealed, so you'll be seeing that project before you shortly. Hillside House is moving forward with their environmental impact report in the Las Positas Valley. Ealing's Park is going on there as well. So there's kind of a lot going on in the Hidden Valley, Las Positas world. And then we just have some other just projects that continue to work their way through the system, some on the private side, some on the institutional side. The Children's Museum is moving forward. The County Bowl is working on a new entrance. The Natural History Museum, you've seen a presentation from them. The Caltrans, the next Caltrans project, the high occupancy vehicle project, is working its way through the system. We have a number of CIP projects. So there's still just activity going on there in the planning and development world. And on the building permit side, let me explain this chart to you. I thought it was informative, and it's kind of reflective of what we've seen on the revenue side and what we're seeing kind of on the workload side. The red bars on the bottom are plan checks, and those tend to be your larger, more substantial projects that go through the system. And the first column is 2003. The last column is 2011. So you can see in the mid-2000s, we were pretty high, over 1,000 plan checks a year. And then with the state of the development activity, we saw a pretty sharp decline in 2007 and 8 and kind of a continually fading of development activity as you got to 2010. But we've seen a pretty sharp upturn here in 2011. And so we are kind of seeing a little more substantial activity coming through the system. That planning pipeline, you know, got quiet for a while, but it's starting to pick up as well. But what's interesting is on the top, the blue chart are what we call over-the-counter permit activities. These are relatively smaller stuff, roof permits and water heater permits and other kind of less substantial stuff. And when the plant check was falling down, this actually over-the-counter stuff picked up. And so the smaller projects kind of picked up, which I guess intuitively makes sense. You don't have a lot of money to do the substantial project, but you do have, you know, the resources and wherewithal to get some little stuff done. So we saw the activity level at the counter kind of pick up. And then Plan Santa Barbara workload for next fiscal year. When council adopts Plan Santa Barbara, you know, we'll have a lot to implement because a lot of the decisions that council have made is kind of put off some of the key decision making to be implemented through ordinance changes as they come up. And so we're going to have to work with council on a priority implementation work program. Review that with we think a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. But like on land use matters, there's some basic things we got to do. Ordinance amendments that deal with the growth management, the accessory dwelling unit sizes, and the zoning map that we just need to wrap up. We have to certify a housing element with the state to remain within compliance with the state and come up with a 5-year work program. We understand there's a lot of interest to get moving on a historic resources element, and we'd be interested in doing that as well. Adopting the adaptive management program to stay on track, mitigation monitoring, and other council priorities. So there's kind of a big to-do list once we wrap up the Plan Santa Barbara process. So with that, I will turn it over quickly now to Brian Bossie to go over the redevelopment home and CDBG issues for you.
We have a quick question, Mr. House.
Paul, thank you for your report on whether now or sometime. Would you please address this? When the staff hearing officer was formed, it was presented as a savings, as a cost savings, and it had to do with that projects that would have otherwise gone to Planning Commission or to a higher, more extensive review could be caught at a lower level and handled at that level. So, at some point, would you help us understand why this is being proposed as a reduction in costs versus what I think it was sold as is a reduction in costs?
Madam Mayor, if I can answer that, because it's a very good question, and I take some responsibility for not explaining this clearly. We are not doing away with the staff hearing officer process. We still have that process, and we want to keep that process. We had organized ourselves into creating a section that kind of held the staff hearing officer and also did training and that sort of stuff. We are not losing that through this reorganization. The staff hearing officer will now reside in the development review section, and the staff for the staff hearing officer who do the staff work will reside in the zoning section, and we will still have a zoning hearing officer process. We're just doing away with what we did from a management standpoint, was organize it into one program within the planning division, which also included training and some other stuff. And we're kind of disbanding that section and kind of going back to old way of doing it. But we still have a zoning hearing officer process, which we think has been very effective at processing the smaller projects more expeditiously and efficiently.
Great, that was my understanding. So you've reorganized to be able to continue doing it
Yes.
even at a lower cost?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the elimination of the part-time planning position is eliminating some training, and what else is it eliminating?
Environmental review. More importantly, it's the loss of kind of that senior planner environmental review expertise that's just going to have to then be
Having another
dispersed.
person do it, so it's now just being spread out amongst other current
Yeah, they're
staff.
existing,
So there's
exactly.
a timing issue. Things could take longer because there's less people doing the work.
Correct. And we lose some of the in-house expertise, but that, you know.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Brian Bossy, and I'm the Housing and Redevelopment Manager with the City of Santa Barbara, and I'm here to present to you the Housing and Redevelopment Division's budget for fiscal year 2012. That also includes the Redevelopment Agency. And as you all sit through these on a regular basis for the next few months, I know you know this is very much a team effort, and I just wanted to acknowledge some staff that I work with, Deirdre Randolph, Stephen Falstich, Mark Aguilar, and Sue Gray, who were a great help of putting all this together. So I just want to say thanks to them. And also to start off with another piece of information that I think is important. The budget that we're presenting to you today is based on the fact that our assumption that the redevelopment agency will be here come July 1. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So we're going to go through redevelopment agency, housing development, some home funds, our CDBG program, as well as rental housing mediation. So back to the state situation. State, as many of you know, are currently facing a $26 billion deficit. They've put together portions of the budget for next year, which reduce it to about a $15 billion gap. So that remains to be solved. The current proposal, the one that's been out there since early January by Governor Brown, proposes to eliminate redevelopment agencies effective July 1, 2011. And based on information from the California Redevelopment Association as well as the League of Cities, redevelopment agencies support approximately 304 jobs annually, including a little over 170,000 construction jobs. Contribute.
304,000.
Pardon me?
You said 304 jobs. I just thought you might want to add the extra zeros there.
Yeah, I'm going to throw 3 more zeros on that because I'd probably support it if it was only 304 jobs. So it's 304,000 jobs. It contributes over $40 billion annually to California's economy as far as the generation of goods and services, and it generates more than $2 billion in state and local taxes in a typical year. That process, the budget process, continues to unfold in Sacramento, and we continue to work with the California Redevelopment Association as well as the League of Cities, and we will keep you apprised of what's going on up in Sacramento. Our agency general fund. This is a quick chart on our tax increment history over the previous 5 years. Tax increment is our primary source of revenue. And as you can see from 2008 on the left to 2012, we had a few good years. 2008, from 7 to 8, we saw a 9.2% increase, an 11.2% increase. And over the last 3 years, it's really leveled off. You can see within plus or minus 2%. This year, we're anticipating about a 1.5% increase in our tax increment revenue. Sorry, but you can't see the purple part down there, but that is the 20% that by law goes towards funding affordable housing projects. And that this year it's about $20 million total, but the housing component, the 20%, is a little over $4 million. The remainder of that, approximately $16 million, is for redevelopment activities. Again, our revenues primarily come from, the overwhelming amount come from tax increment revenues to the tune of $16 million, $16.2 million, which represents about 98.4% of our revenue stream. We have a small portion in loans and rent, and we have another amount of funding or funds coming from interest income on those resources. Oops. As far as expenditures are concerned, our biggest expenditure is debt service. Redevelopment agencies are creatures of debt. They issue bonds and then pay those bonds back as property tax revenue increases. We pay a little over $7.5 million a year to satisfy our debt obligations. Those are two debts, 2001 and 2003. That will be paid off in 2019, and that number basically stays the same through 2019. We have a small appropriated reserve, a little over $800,000 for special projects, our operating expenses of $1.7 million, and then once that's all taken out, and again, this is the 80% money, it appears that we'll have about $6.3 million available for future capital projects and programs. Now, as far as our redevelopment agency capital program is concerned, right now, the current capital program consists of 27 capital projects that total a little over $26 million in assets. We have one community grant outstanding, or I should say pending, and that's a request for $1 million from the Ensemble Theater. Our primary funding sources for capital projects and programs are the Capital Fund, which is the tax increment revenues, as well as our 2001 and 2003 bonds. Some recently completed projects that the agency board has been responsible for. The Cabrillo Recreation Center is nearing completion, and it's quite a transformation. We've also had the East Cabrillo sidewalks, our Phase 2, which went from Milpas down to the Cabrillo Arts Pavilion, and basically does complete from all the way over at the harbor to along the waterfront all the way over to the Cabrillo Arts Pavilion. Also recently completed the West Side Center park improvements, all new equipment and landscaping looks much better, as well as our West Downtown pedestrian improvements, which were along Anapamu and Ortega from the 101 freeway over to Chapala Street. Now, a partial list of projects that we're currently working on, and I've broken these out into their different phases. We're currently under construction with the Fire Department Administration Annex, about $3.7 million project. We are also working on renovations to parking structures 9 and 10 in this particular fiscal year. Number 10 is finished. Number 9 starts, I believe, today, actually, and then we will finish or address parking structure number 2, which is also included in this funding figure, next winter. Chase Palm Park lighting and electrical upgrade started last week, and that'll be done in time for our concerts in the park come June. Projects in final design include West Downtown lighting, Phase 1. That's going to add to the additional improvements that the recent bridge opening had. There was some lighting there, but we're going to add to that. Community Arts Workshop, 3 park restroom renovations, as well as parking lot on our property at Helena that is adjacent to the youth hostel. In preliminary design, we have the police department, Library Plaza, a number of projects in the concept phase, including Plaza de la Guerra. And then we have our miscellaneous category, again, the Ensemble Theater, proposed RDA grant of $1 million. Mission Creek Flood Control Project, $3.25 million set aside for those series of projects. Now,
Madam Mayor, I just thought I was going to jump in on the restorative policing program that we've been working on and that Council's already had some conversations about. We're proposing in the budget, and it's still a work in progress, which is my main message today, but a 3-year pilot program to try to address the downtown waterfront and lower Milpas area issues through increased support to the police department's tactical patrol force program, or its restorative policing program. The initial thoughts are to use additional on-street staffing and outreach workers to coordinate with the police and get a larger police presence in the downtown core. And we put in an initial budget when we were putting the budget together almost a month ago, about $135,000 per year, but there's flexibility in that number. And so what I'd like to ask is that let us continue to flush out the details with that and bring that back as part of the police department's presentation in 2 weeks and have a good, thorough discussion. We'll be prepared to kind of give you some additional thoughts about that. And then once we kind of nail the program down, we'll have that budgeted part through the redevelopment agency just follow with that. So that would be our thought on the restorative policing program.
Thank you, Paul. Back to remaining unfunded projects. These are projects that have been submitted by various departments and divisions in the city who are seeking redevelopment agency funds to either add on to the funds they already have, or in a lot of instances, funds they don't have, but to complete important projects in our project area. It includes everything from the Cabrillo Pavilion Arts Center, which we estimate to be about a $6 million obligation, downtown sidewalks, additional lighting in the lower west downtown, 2 more phases, improvements to the Cabrillo ball fields, improvements to the lower Milpas area, including primarily pedestrian improvements, sidewalks, lighting, things like that. Library renovation, that would be the interior of the lighting, not to be confused with across the column there, the Library Plaza, which is outside. And then also possible additional funding for the police department renovation. So these are all projects that are currently out there. Just a sampling, we have actually a list of over 30 that total well over $20 million. So there's a lot of different projects out there seeking redevelopment agency funding. At this particular time, we don't have a new capital program to present to you for this fiscal year. What we'd like to do is wait to see how everything plays out at the state. This is something we have done in the past with you when they were after redevelopment agency funds as far as ERAF obligations and the like. So what we'd like to do is really get an idea of what they're doing, where they're going, but we do think it's a good idea once we have a solid understanding of where they are headed to possibly have a work session with council, the redevelopment agency board, to go over all our existing projects as well as some of these remaining unfunded projects, as well as projects as you may have in your heads, and kind of assess your priorities, make sure your priorities are still, or maybe they've changed over the years, but we will be looking to do that in the coming months with you. Agency, this is our housing fund. And this is the 20% from the tax increment revenue. And again, tax increment revenues represent 94% of affordable housing revenues to the tune of a little over $4 million. A small bit of interest income at about $62,000, and then loan repayments at about $200,000. As far as expenditures are concerned, we have operating expenses of about $870,000. The Housing Fund also has debt obligation for a bond that was issued to help fund the St. Vincent's project, a small appropriated reserve, and then what is left is about $2.7 million for future affordable housing projects. And I'll get back to that $2.7 million in a second. As for what's going on right now with affordable housing, many of you, if not all of you, attended the Artisan Court grand opening a few weeks ago. That was a huge financing that was given by both the agency as well as other city homes as far as home funds are concerned, over $5 million, and resulted in 56 units. We've also got Mom's Place under construction, and the city has contributed over $1 million towards that effort, 8 new units as well as the rehabilitation of 8 existing units, I should say. And then the agency board has also put out a little over $6 million, $6.4 million for the Bath Street property. This is a housing authority property that is currently applying for tax credits, and they were unsuccessful in the last round. It's very, very competitive, but we are hoping that they are successful this year, and that would result in approximately 54 more units in our downtown. And again, that's on Bath Street. So housing funds available for affordable housing in the coming year. We've got that $2.7 million that I just mentioned. That's the newly available. That's from the 20% set aside. And we also have reserves of a little over $4 million. And that's from previous years, the 20% that couldn't be spent. You know, as you can imagine, housing projects kind of ebb and flow. And so sometimes we get a big rush on projects. It just depends on where they're at in the process. So grand total, we have about $6.7 million available for affordable housing projects. Our home program, the city receives annual entitlements of home program funds. The budgeted amounts, what you'll see in your document, are we estimated a cut of, I believe, 5.5%, which would total, our total then would be about $800,000 for fiscal year 2012 and 2013. How those funds are spent, 10% can go towards administration, and 90% must be loaned or granted to affordable housing projects that target very low and low-income renters. I should also mention that that particular dollar amount has changed. We, again, based our numbers on about a 5.5% reduction, and it's actually turned out to be a little over 11%. So I believe that $800,000 goes to about 760, somewhere around there. So those funds have been reduced. Community Development Block Grant. Our revenues for this year are anticipated to be, at least in your budgeted document again, a little over $1 million, $1,065,000. Combined with repayments of $250,000 brings us to a little over $1.3 million. I should let you know that these funds will also change. Our numbers were based on an 8.5% decrease in funding. As it turns out, it's going to be a 16.5% or 16.2% decrease, which, believe it or not, we actually think is a whole lot better than what they were proposing, which was about a 62.5% decrease. So here's how those funds are broken out. Capital grants, these are the three main areas. Capital grants of almost $1 million. Public services, and then the purple slice is our fair housing and administration, the CDBG administration component. So again, moved forward with an 8.5% decrease. It turns out it's going to be about 16.2% decrease. But we did, when we came to the council on March 22nd with our proposed program for fiscal year 12, we knew that the dollars and cents were going to change, and so there was a contingency plan that you folks approved, and our Community Development Human Services Committee will enact that contingency plan and adjust the funds accordingly. So that's CDBG. One part of that, an additional program, is our Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program, and this is a program that has been around for quite some time. And the idea was to preserve the affordable housing stock. This is for folks who didn't have the funding to fix electrical, health and safety issues associated with their house, whether it was exposed electrical, bad plumbing, bad roofs, and a whole other assortment of bad things at their homes. So what this program would do would loan up to $100,000 to these folks at a very nominal interest rate, and city staff within our division would walk them through the process, hire the contract, do all that for them to make sure they were living in appropriate homes. And so what happened is, over the past decade, the program has declined in both demand and activity. So fewer and fewer people were coming to get those loans. We were advertising, we were going out, we were pounding the pavement, we were doing everything we could to try to sustain that program. But again, it's declined to the point where we had one employee in that particular program. This employee retired in the fall of last year. And looking at the program, and it's slowly shrinking over the years, we decided to discontinue that program and eliminate that position. So, but I should say that we're not going to completely eliminate it. We're going to take a small portion of that funding and continue to fund the multifamily component of that. We have a lot of issues with multifamily units, whether it be the Housing Authority or other similar affordable housing providers, that their stock is aging. And so we're going to use a small portion of that. It'll, instead of being run through that one single person, it'll now be run through our affordable housing program. But the end result of eliminating this particular program and being fiscally responsible is that it does put a financial strain on our rental housing mediation task force program. Now, the rental housing mediation task force program has been around since 1976. It has always been a grant-funded program. Its primary source of funding has been through CDBG administration funds. CDBG is broken out, if you recall the pie chart a few slides ago, it's broken out into capital, and then CDBG administration to run the program, and then the other public services was the last category. So what happens is by discontinuing the HRLP program, the Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program, that overhead that was used to go towards HRLP now comes back and is plugged into the CDBG administrative program, which is where rental housing mediation task force budget was. So the current staffing level, what we have going on right now, the program includes one full-time employee and 2 part-time employees. And they do a great deal, but it's basically broken out into 4 categories. The first is information and outreach, and that's the overwhelming majority of the program. They also do consultations, both in the office. Folks who come in and talk to them about issues. They obviously provide mediations, and they do that through the 15-member council-appointed Rental Housing Mediation Task Force. So those are folks are professionally trained and supported, and our staff does that. So these are volunteer folks. They are very into what they do. They do a wonderful job. They help a whole lot of people, but they are volunteers, and so that effort is also supported by our staff. Now, with that current staffing level of 1 full-time employee and 2 part-time employees, what happens is to continue with that would require an ongoing general fund subsidy of $55,000. Now, recall again that this is all grant funded. This program is all grant funded and always has been. So it's never sought general fund monies. So it would require an ongoing general fund subsidy of $55,000. And this also assumes that we would continue to get funding from the City of Carpinteria as well as the County of Santa Barbara to the tune of $33,000 combined. I should also mention that the City of Goleta has recently popped back into the picture, and they may be seeking some services from Rental Housing Mediation Task Force as well. The extent and the dollar amount we're still working out. But if these, just to focus on Carpinteria and Santa Barbara, if we don't get these funds through their budget process, and both of those are through their general funds, then that $55,000 general fund subsidy would increase to an ongoing $88,000 general fund subsidy.
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
Are we assuming the $88,000 is for work throughout the South Coast minus the City of Goleta? City of Goleta is right now doing their own program, right? So if the City of Carpinteria and the County of Santa Barbara, let's say they decide not to fund things, and we wanted to look at, well, what does it just cost just for the City of Santa Barbara? Would that be $55,000, or I mean, because wouldn't the difference between the $55,000 and the $88,000 mean you're servicing people outside the city because they're paying for it? See what I'm going with this?
Right, and that's a great question. And the interesting thing about this program is it's very hard to break out for a certain area. It's very hard to break out just for Carpinteria. It's very hard to break out just for Goleta, just for the county. They all ask for different services, kind of a different suite of services, where the City of Carpinteria asks for the full plate. They want mediations, outreach, phone mediations. I believe the City of Goleta would probably just, if I understand correctly, want information over the phone as well as over the phone mediations. The county just gets phone information. We don't provide mediation services for them. So it's hard to break down into each category, but we do our best. It's more of a lump sum program where everybody benefits, and it's really hard to spread out.
How did you get to the $8,000 and the $25,000?
That is what we ask from them to help with the administrative side of things. And so over the years, these have been and those numbers have fluctuated slightly over the years, but this is what we get from them to help as best we can parse out what their share of it is based on population and need.
So what would the number be for a general fund subsidy if we just looked at the City of Santa Barbara? If, let's say the others just said they're not going to fund it.
With the full suite of services as we currently do today?
Just for city residents as opposed to the whole region.
Right. I guess sorry to ask a question.
Yes, the whole suite, whatever it is they need. Right.
Okay, I think I'm going to get to that in a couple slides
Okay.
here. That may answer your question, and then we can go from there, if that's all right with you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, based on not having ever received general fund subsidy for the program, and just on what we received from grants, we moved forward with a budget that was just that, just based on grants and revenue as we always have. To do that, this is what we have proposed, or I should say budgeted for you to consider. The budgeted staffing level would be 1 full-time employee. So the 2 part-time employees would no longer be with the program. They would provide, this 1 employee would provide information, and that would be the bulk of it, as information represents about 93% of the activity of the program. This last bullet, I should let you know, that is something new. That is something that your council may wish to consider. Last week we had a special meeting with the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force Board. We talked to them about the budget. Obviously, they were very concerned. They're very devoted folks. And there were a lot of good ideas passed around, a lot of good questions, too. And one of the ideas was to keep the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force together. Do not disband them. They've been trained. They offer a wealth of information and assistance for folks in our community. We promised them that we would look into that a little more. We did. It seems like something that you may wish to consider and that we feel could work. We do have some concerns because in the past what we've done is we've had one full-time employee, no part-time employees, and we've offered the full suite of services. Granted, it was to all these different entities, and it did not work. It came nowhere near close to work. It was just way too much. So what we'd like to do is consider this, if you wish, the idea of keeping the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force Board intact. They would meet on more of an as-needed basis. Currently, they meet quarterly, roughly quarterly. We would go to an as-needed basis, and what staff are thinking is they would be focused more on your larger mediation issues, your mass eviction issues, because there's really not anybody out there to address that we know of. So, and these people bring that expertise, and they could come and be intact on an as-needed basis.
And would this proposal be just within the city of Santa Barbara only, or would this be throughout the South Coast?
This would, again, it would be based on receiving those funds from City of Carpinteria and the County of Santa Barbara. To just bring it to just the city, I'll bring up Sue Gray, who can address that.
Ms. Gray.
Madam Mayor, Sue Gray, Administrative Services Manager and Community Development. What's being proposed in the budget is one full-time person. This slide right here is assuming that we're going to receive money from City of Carp and the County of Santa Barbara. So it would be services throughout the South Coast, excluding Goleta, unless we had a contract with them also. If we did not get the funds from the City of Carp or the county, it's still going to take one full-time person to provide just these services to City of Santa Barbara residents. There's a lot of people that they're not able to get to now with one full-time and two part-time. So losing those contracts, we wouldn't be serving those jurisdictions, but there's enough in Santa Barbara to keep them busy that they're really not getting to right now.
Okay.
And with the staff as it is now, it's kind of the same thing. We'd have to look at it. We didn't really consider that, but it would need to be to provide the full services. Bare minimum would be one full-time and one part-time to do just the City of Santa Barbara. And to do the other jurisdictions, it's two part-time and one full-time. That's what we found.
Is there a dollar number associated?
It's approximately $20,000 per part-time person.
So are you saying if we added $20,000 of general fund money to a part-time person, you can have a full suite of services within the City of Santa Barbara?
No.
Okay.
Because
so that's what I need to know. I need to know what the number is, because if the other jurisdictions, they're going to make their own decision. We have no control over that right now. I'm just looking for the City of Santa Barbara, what the number is if we were to provide what we always had done before, just in the City of Santa Barbara.
But you're saying with just one part-time person instead of two.
I don't know what the staffing is. Whatever it is.
To do one full-time and two part-time, it's $88,000.
Whether it's within the City of Santa Barbara or throughout the whole South Coast, it doesn't make any difference?
It doesn't make any difference because we feel there's a need in the City of Santa Barbara that could take up all that time. If you reduced it to one full-time and one part-time, thinking that the level's going to be a little bit less,
Okay.
it would be $68,000.
68. Okay.
That's
the
their
number I'm looking for. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. House.
Just real quick, you said this has always been grant funded all along, and is there any reason why general funds couldn't be used for this?
No, there's not. That's, again, program has always been grant funded, so we've never had to cross this bridge. And so if the council wants to find a way to carve out whatever dollar amount they see fit, then it would go towards.
Okay. I mean,
rounding out
given
the
it's such
program.
an essential program, I'm surprised that you didn't present it as a general funded program this time, because it's an essential program. No, I know, but this time we don't have the grants, but we need the program, right? Didn't you just said the need is bigger than what we can fulfill so far, right? Sue, if you would help, because when you have just one person, I remember one year, it was 2 years ago, you told me that you were dropping almost 90 calls on an ongoing basis because you didn't have enough people to be able to answer and respond to the calls, right?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that is correct. Back then, that was the number. We didn't propose using general fund monies in our current budget that we submitted, just due to the fact that we were given a status quo budget and we already had that $211,000 shortfall that we had to make up.
I understand. Okay, I can see why. I get it. Thank you very much.
And I'll also, because this is the budget that I recommended to you, when I met with the staff and we went over this and I looked at other city priorities and then I looked at what goes on in other communities statewide, there's very few communities statewide that have programs like this. We're pretty unique in that regard. So in my opinion, and I'll have to take responsibility, compared to other priorities that I looked at when we're still in a cutback mode, I didn't believe that this rose up to the level that we should then take general fund money and put into it. But again, in the end, it's a council issue, and you guys decide what the priority
I mean, it's
is.
clear you know how I feel about it. But one of the things that's helpful for you to be here, Sue, is to help us all understand how much in demand these services have been. And then I don't know, has there ever been any quantification whatsoever of the kind of savings that has resulted from this for those who have taken advantage of these services? I mean, landlords and tenants have both benefited tremendously from having these solutions be resolved before they end up in court. And how do you measure your results?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, we have not done a quantifiable measure of what it would cost. The information and the staff consultation is pretty brief, kind of mostly over the phone. The mediations, they average probably $400 per mediation, and I think that's, for one, it's way less than it would be if they went to a professional mediator and had to pay for it. And if lawyers get involved, if there's a dispute, then it's
okay.
A lot
Thank
more.
you. How many contacts do you have in a given year with the public on this? You've got information requests, and then you also have actual mediations.
I believe there's about 1,700 contacts total, and I would say probably 50 are mediations.
1,700 contacts and 50 mediations in a year. Thank you.
Did you have a question, Mr. Ross? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. That was kind of got to one of my questions. So there is some fee recovery when they go to mediation?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, I'm sorry, I misspoke there. There is that's the cost to
That's
provide the
cost.
mediations.
So
there's no.
So have we looked at, or is it in keeping what we're trying to do to try to look at potentially user fee recovery in this situation?
We have looked at that in a traditional mediation. It would be paid half by the landlord, half by the tenant. The tenants can't afford it, and it's always been felt that if we charge the landlords the whole fee, that the mediation it would appear to be not, what's the word? Neutral mediation, yes. So we have looked at that.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Yeah, if it was split, as you said before, that would probably sharply reduce the activity. Is that correct? Because people would say, "Oh, I can't just afford it." Mediation.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, are you asking if we did charge the landlord only?
No.
And not?
Divided it.
Oh, divided it? There would be a lot of people who couldn't afford it. I would say probably 90% of the people, the renters, wouldn't be able to afford it.
How expensive is it?
It's, I think on average, it's $400 per mediation
Okay.
for formal mediations.
And you said there were 50-something per annum. Was that an annual figure? Mediations?
Yes, those include both actual sit-down face-to-face mediations and informal staff mediations where she'll talk to the landlord and talk to the tenant on the phone, and then they come to an agreement. So it's not, there's probably...
I would say maybe one a month of formal sit-down mediations on average. The majority are over-the-phone mediations. And just to break it down further, as far as hours are concerned, in fiscal year 2009 and then again in fiscal year 2010, the way it broke down was about 7% of the overall hours that were spent were on mediations, both in person as well as over the phone. The other 93% were on information outreach, phone calls, dissemination of information and outreach.
Is most of the mediation, does it regard the security deposits?
A good portion, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, it varies, but a good deal of over the phone information is both security deposit. It runs the gamut, and maybe I know a lot of the folks here from the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force are here, and they could probably break it down for you a whole lot better than I could.
Okay, and compared to other populations, comparable populations, do we have more of this kind of mediation than normal, or is there? I don't even know what the norm is.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, I don't know either. As Mr. Armstrong was stating, this program, having been run by a city for so many years, is very different. It is very unique. There are quite a few communities across the state and elsewhere who have mediation services. They're generally performed by a whole host of nonprofit agencies. So the fact that a city organization stepped up to the plate back in 1976 and put together this program is very different, very unique.
Thank you.
Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, I'm going to tie this together, but bear with me. For the multifamily rehabilitation loan program, how much money is in that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, I believe this year it varies. It's based on repayments of previous loans. So sometimes I believe we budget about $250,000 last year. I think it was upwards of almost $500,000. So what we're planning on for fiscal year 2012 is about $250,000 just to play it conservative. We have had a hard time in the past with the HROP program of spending all that money. So because the demand just continued to decline, but we had to spend that money. So it's been tough, a whole lot of pounding the pavement, but thankfully it's worked out for us in the past.
Could some of that money be funneled into this task force?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, unfortunately, the repayment monies that come back from Community Development Block Grant can only be used for capital. It can't be used for public service or administration, which is where rental mediation falls under the administration category. So
Okay.
unfortunately, that's not allowed.
Idea number 2. How about the RDA funds?
As far as RDA funds being used to support this program, generally speaking, with RDA funds, you're not allowed to use them for maintenance or operational purposes. So the general rule is you can't use them to help somebody fund their program. And that's kind of been a policy, but the law, but also a policy decision by the agency board.
Rules. My other idea, which I think has some validity, there are several nonprofits that are housing advocacy groups, and I think if they could partner together, and I can't speak for them, but I received a message from the Santa Barbara Rental Housing Association, and they like this program. So maybe with the housing advocacy groups and the rental housing property owners thing, that they could pool together, and they could probably even do it less expensively.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, that is an idea. And to let you folks know, we have gone out and continue to pursue grant opportunities. Again, our primary sources for that have been the City of Carpinteria, the County of Santa Barbara, both through General Fund and CDBG, as well as city CDBG funds. We got an HPRP grant a few years ago that's a 3-year grant. It's been the criteria for that particular grant are very restrictive, and so it's been hard to actually spend that money. And so what we've actually had to do is reappropriate it to some of the, it was a group effort, so we had to reappropriate that to some of the other organizations who are having more success with it. We have in the past gone to the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association asking if they were willing to donate funding. They were not at that particular time. As you can imagine, the economy is not great. But they did offer us free advertising space in their program, which has been helpful, and I think we continue to use that today. So that was a cost incurred by them. We have also set up a donation link on the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force website where you can donate to the program, and it's run through the Housing Authority, the nonprofit grant status. And we also, over the past year and a half, had been looking into a business license fee for residential property owners of 4 units or more. We were studying that, if you recall. However, in November of 2010, Prop 26 passed, which basically took that whole idea of putting a business license fee on these folks, kind of threw it out the window. You'd require a 2/3 vote of the people because that goes directly towards a particular service. So we haven't been just sitting back. As a matter of fact, about a week and a half ago, I did apply for a grant through the Santa Barbara Foundation for $60,000 to try and keep this program running. So we are trying.
I still think the idea of, Pueblo, the Community Action Commission, SB for All, SB Can, I think if they could get their resources together and divide it up, it would be very doable. That's just my idea. Thanks.
Can you repeat, you mentioned the HPRP, the Homeless Prevention Rapid Rehousing. Could those funds be used for mediation costs if it resulted in a prevention of an eviction? I mean, that's part of the purpose of that program.
Madam Mayor, that's exactly correct. And the Rental Housing Mediation Program is part of our collaborative, and they have a pot of money to use for that very purpose. Unfortunately, to certify that you're eligible for prevention is very stringent per the guidelines and regulations, and the rental mediation program has kind of had a hard time finding people to actually fit into that category. They are using the money. We didn't include it in any of our calculations here because it's basically a bill per client, per hour spent.
I want to open it up to public comment, although unless there are questions about the whole, was that it for the department presentation? I thought that was the last slide. Okay. If there's any questions, though, about the full department first, or we have quite a few public comment, and then we can come back. You want, which way? Would you like a question right now? Sure, go ahead, Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Regarding Mr. Casey's presentation, just looking at it from a grand scale from community development. So as you look at the budget sources and the amount that the RDA makes up of that, and then, of course, the size of the department and where we're at right now in terms of our FTEs, is this a brand new picture at the sunset of RDA than what we're looking at today in terms of the structure of the department and how it looks?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, what we presented to you today is a picture of the department as we propose it for the next fiscal year. The redevelopment agency expires at the end of 2015.
Understood.
And
I'm
so
just thinking
so we're
in terms
assuming,
of where I understand that we need to be able to utilize these funds and plan for these funds and do the projects we do. I'm just trying to get a concept of how I understand like where we've been, where we are, and where we're going in terms of the budget in a longer term basis, and with the uncertainty of certainly the RDA and the governor and his wishes. So
yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Rouse, I think I understand your question, and that is kind of preparing for the sunsetting of the redevelopment agency and needing to start transitioning down because we won't have an agency come 2015 or sooner if the state acts prior to our sunset. So yes, we've begun the thought process for that. Strategically, we're looking at staff vacancies even within the redevelopment agency and not filling them as they come up. That's why you see some of the programs, starting to wind down. Working with the downtown organization, as you're familiar with, it's now kind of on their radar about starting to need to start planning for life after the redevelopment agency and how do we continue to reinvest in downtown to make sure it's the economic engine that we need it to be. And so those thoughts are coming on. I think the last couple months with the state just suddenly, even after Proposition 22 passed in the fall that said hands-off redevelopment agency and passed with over 60%, I think, to be honest, we were caught off guard come January that the governor proposed the complete elimination of redevelopment agencies. And so that's kind of thrown us for a loop, and having to really expedite kind of the thought process about what do we do when the agency expires. What we thought was going to be a thoughtful, deliberative 4-year transition kind of got put on the front burner real quick with the state's proposal. And so we're still kind of seeing how that plays
But
itself out.
simplistically speaking, the org chart would look proportionally different to the...
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Very much so.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quick question, Paul. You said that you were going to look at possible RDA funds applied to police programs, et cetera, for the next 3 years. Would it be helpful for you to hear from us what we would like if you could do? Because I've heard a number of people say, if we just had, on this council and elsewhere, if we just had 2 cops on the street during the daytime on State Street and the same on Milpas, that we think would make a ton of difference. I hope it would. I think it might too. But, if you want a target to shoot at, that's one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before public comment? Okay. Move to public comment. I have 2 minutes up on the podium here. When you hear your name, come on up. And if you are next up, please come close to the podium. We have quite a few speakers. And I'm assuming this is all on the Community Development Department. If you want to speak on the library, we'll do that after the Library Department presentation. Okay, we'll start with Robert Burke. It'll be followed by Leon Lunt. Good afternoon. You're
Madam
one of our
Mayor,
mediators.
council members, my name is Robert Burke. I am on the task force. I'm speaking my own opinions. In the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force purpose sheet, it says, on the third one, it says prevention of homelessness. I know that is an often spoken about topic here, so that is one of the purposes of the mediation of the task force. On the chart for the city council advisory groups, out of all of them, especially under community development on the right here, I see Planning Commission and Rental House Mediation Task Force, Sign Committee. Out of all of those, about the only one that deals directly with people, and people is our major object, is the task force. Everybody else is dealing with stuff. We're dealing with people. Not to denigrate that, it's important. But if the Planning Commission is the bones helping us set structure for our town, and the Architectural Board of Review is how what the town looks like, then the Mediation Task Force is the heartbeat. We're the ones who deal with people. We deal with the people who do not have the capacity to help themselves. My own thoughts are that the questions I would like to pose is, shall the Rental House Mediation Task Force continue to meet on a regular basis? And that is yes. This proposition has been presented us too quickly. The full board has not, on a regular meeting, had the time to address this issue. We are not the last flea on the tip of the tail of the dog. We are a very essential part of how this city functions. Please do not allow the people who cannot help themselves be abandoned from our task. The issue is not money. I see millions of dollars going for some projects. We're talking in tens of thousands of dollars here, not millions. The issue is not money. The issue is intention, and I hope your intention is to keep this force, and I would boldly say to expand it. Thank you.
Leon Lunt will be followed by Mark Alvarado. Is Leon here? Did he have to leave? Okay, Mark, why don't you come on up? Be followed by Tony. I'm going to mess this up. Shoot.
Good afternoon. Mark Alvarado, I'm the new executive director for Pueblo. I've just come just to kind of extend any kind of assistance we can. Hopefully we can find the funding to keep status quo of the program. That would be great. 60% renters in our city, a program been around since 1976. I think it's a volunteer board, task force that we can continue to work with. But if not, I pledge that we can work together to come up with some kind of solution to maintain the service. It's vital. It's critical for this community. And so from Pueblo's perspective, we just want to ensure you that we want to work with the city to make sure that we don't lose this program. Thank you.
There we go. Help me with your last name again. I'm sorry. Jill Heiss. Thank you. We'll be followed by Lynn Goebel.
Madam Mayor and council members, good afternoon. Regarding the rental housing mediation task force, the League of Women Voters at all levels, national, state, and local, has for decades supported affordable housing for those with low incomes as a basic human need. The LWV supports adequately funded, government-supported legal assistance programs for those who are unable to pay. We also support protection of the rights of both tenants and landlords. The mediation program meets both these criteria, and we urge you to continue providing this important service. The Rental Housing Mediation Task Force program has been providing mediation between landlords and tenants, and very low-income tenants since 1976. This is an essential service. It resolves conflicts without costly legal challenges. The RHMTF is the only service provider of mediation services to landlords and tenants. Tenants depend on and have benefited from this service. Effective problem solving also contributes to a more stable, housed population that otherwise might end up homeless and which ultimately would cost the community more. Given that 60% of Santa Barbara residents are renters, it seems reasonable and prudent to have a process in place to resolve the inevitable conflicts that arise. Given the fact that mediation is proven to work and we have a workable system in place, eliminating this service and disbanding the task force would be counterproductive. This step would also be difficult to reverse. Keeping it, even with a reduced staff, would enable the RHMTF to continue their valuable services. The League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara encourages you to preserve the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, its volunteer board, funding and staffing, even if some cuts are regrettably necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Goebel will be followed by Barbara Smith Sherrill.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Lynn Goebel. I too sit on the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force. In my day job, I am an attorney, although my practice is not landlord-tenant. The Rental Housing Mediation Task Force is a vital organization that provides critical services to landlords, tenants, and it shouldn't be overlooked that there's also disputes between roommates. I think in this community there are a lot of individuals living together, and they do have disputes as well that are resolved by this organization. I recently participated in a mediation where I gave over 4 hours of my time, which I typically bill at $285 an hour, whether I'm worth that or not. But there simply must be an alternative to disbanding this volunteer task force. I've never been fired from a volunteer position, and I don't intend to start now. Thank you.
Barbara Smith Sherrill will be followed by Silvio Di Loreto.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Council. Well, I'm really just going to reiterate what has been said already. It was quite a shock to us, I have to say, to realise that it was proposed that the task force would be disbanded, that it would be no more. The work which we do willingly. We don't charge for it. We don't cost you a thing. The money, of course, comes from the part-time staff. That's what's trying to be saved here. But we feel that since other essential services are funded from the general fund, that the task force staff should also be funded from the general fund. I don't know what else I can say. It's all been said, and we, as a task force, have not yet had a chance to have a meeting of our own. We did have a meeting with Mr. Boss last week, and we put forward some various ideas, some wonderful ideas from yourselves just now. I'm very heartened to hear that you do regard it as an important service. But we do ask you, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keep the task force in being. Thank you very much.
Silvio Di Loreto will be followed by Kyle, I think it's Tan or Tana.
Madam Mayor, Madam Self, and the rest of the council, my friends. By the way, I'm Silvio Di Loreto, and I'm the only person that's been there since the inception. So if you have any questions regarding history, let me know, and I'll try to respond to them. But I'm not going to repeat anything that has been said, but I would like to share with you that there is one expense that I think is totally unnecessary, and that is it's the expense of training the mediators. I think that Andrea or whoever's in charge of the program should be given the authority to say whether or not a person is qualified to continue. Because many years ago, the Chamber took it upon themselves to limit the terms of all the appointees. And, most of the other organizations within the city have political consequences. The Mediation Task Force doesn't. The more experienced we are, the better service we can provide. And it's unfortunately now the task force volunteers serve for a couple of years, they get proficient, and they're dropped. And that's not necessary. And I think that if you need to pass a law to do so, there'll be quite a savings. And leave it up to whoever's in charge of the mediation program to determine whether a participant should continue or not. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle Tan, followed by Tana, thank you, followed by Emily Allen.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Tana, and I'm a UCSB student. And I'm here to speak to the vitality of the program, and not just, I don't want to reiterate what everybody else has said, but just as Mark said, 60% of residents in Santa Barbara are tenants, and in Isla Vista especially, the majority are tenants. We're students who go to school there, and there are resources out there for us that I think are necessary and critical for the community, and not just in all of Santa Barbara as well. So I just wanted to express as a student and as a part of the community of Santa Barbara that this is a critical program and should not be disbanded. So thank you.
Emily Allen will be followed by Ellen Goodstein.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today, the LA Times ran an article entitled, "Residents of LA County's Poorest Areas to Get Help in Keeping Their Homes." The County of LA is launching a pilot program to provide legal assistance to about 15,000 of the area's poorest renters. Since 1976, the City of Santa Barbara has had the benefit of the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force that provides mediation services to both landlords and low-income renters. So even though very few jurisdictions may be doing this type of service, you are at the forefront and you are leaders in this type of service. To quote today's LA Times article, providing assistance will lead to broader economic effects on the community by keeping people off the streets and in their jobs, and keeping children in their homes. Not only is it a moral right, it economically makes sense. Mediation assistance also makes sense. Advice and self-help may be a benefit to those who call the task force. However, this type of communication is one-sided. The mediation services the task force provides are a forum to both the landlord and to the renter. This can be a benefit to avoiding costly litigation, and if an agreement is reached, can prevent an eviction that can lead to homelessness. The program in its current form can serve as a model to other efforts to preventing and ending homelessness. This is a successful collaboration between the city and an all-volunteer panel of mediators who donate valuable services to address a social need. We do not stand before you today asking that you make no cuts. But there is a way to be creative and collaborative and to find a solution that allows the volunteers to continue to serve the city of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Ellen Goodstein will be followed by Hillary Klieger.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Ellen Goodstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Legal Aid Foundation of Santa Barbara County, and I stand here today in support of not just maintaining the current position of Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, but I would tell you that we need more mediation in our community and not less. Mediation is a very effective, cost-effective, promotes civility between the parties. You have two otherwise contentious folks coming together and learning to negotiate and learning to settle the differences between them instead of having a third party bring a resolution on top of them. And it brings the parties to understand and learn about what it takes to get along in a community and to work out their problems together without the unnecessary expense of litigation and a court trial. We work very closely with rental housing mediation staff. We refer clients who we think are perfect candidates to resolve their disputes in the mediation process, and when they're unsuccessful, they will then refer those clients to us, unfortunately, for litigation. I will say that the demands among tenants facing eviction has not decreased, it has increased. The numbers of people coming to our door asking for housing help have just dramatically increased. And it's not just among the low income. We have 25 seconds. We have formerly middle-class folks coming to our door. So I would argue that volunteer pro bono mediation, how do you fire people through who are providing pro bono services that are greatly needed? This program has been in existence since 1976 for good reason. They do a really good job, and I think that Santa Barbara showed incredible vision when it brought about this program. So I support no cuts and continued mediation, if not more so. Thank you.
Hillary Klieger will be followed by Patricia Flores, and the final speaker will be Sharon Rose.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the Council. I'm Hillary Klieger. I represent the Isla Vista Tenants Union, which is the only tenant union in the County of Santa Barbara, and I'm also the co-chair of the Rental Housing Roundtable, of which the Isla Vista Tenants Union is a partner. The Isla Vista Tenants Union supports the rental housing mediation services, particularly the mediation services. As the only tenants union of Santa Barbara, IB2 receives calls and walk-ins from tenants from all over the County of Santa Barbara. They are supposed to be only serving UCSB students, whether they live in Isla Vista or not. And that means that they could be living in the city of Santa Barbara. And also they're supposed to be serving the entire community of Isla Vista. However, because there are relatively few services for renters, they do come to us. We rely heavily on the Rental Mediation Task Force, and I've had several success stories that if I had more time I could share with you. As you've heard, this is the only non-biased mediation available to help both landlords and tenants. And my colleague, Chuck Eckert, isn't here, but he is the president of both the Isla Vista Property Owners Association and the Santa Barbara Rental Property Owners Association. And he was quite dismayed to hear that this was possibly happening because it is a benefit to landlords as well as tenants. I really hope that we can find, I hope we won't disband a volunteer task force in the face of a temporary budget shortfall. Hopefully we can find this money. One tenant that I would like to talk about she received Section 8 funding, and she was living in a fourplex. The place had become so overrun with cockroaches that the families were not able to cook or use their stoves. The landlord was abusive. The only type of communication he would have with the tenants was yelling and intimidating. And I worked with her for probably close to a year before she was ready to do mediation. And through the Rental Mediation Task Force, she and the landlord were able to sit down with the volunteer mediator and come up with a solution. And her situation was much more complex than just the infestation, but they were able to come up with a contract. The housing situation was remedied. She was able to stay in her housing. She was facing eviction. And, it kept two families and two individuals that are low income off the streets and in their homes. So I've seen it work, and I think
Wind up, please.
I'm sorry?
You're over 2 minutes.
I'm
so if you
over
could
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Can I just, a couple things that...
You're at 2.5 minutes already, so I just want to be fair to everyone else.
Okay.
But I think if you could have one more sentence or so, that should do it.
Yeah, I just want to say that, the nonprofit organizations are already really pushed as well, too. So it's, if we did have funding, we would be putting it in there already, but we definitely will look, work with the city. And I would encourage us to work with the other communities as well that are, the county and the cities to make sure that of Carpinteria and Goleta, because together we can make this happen.
Great. Thank you very much. Patricia Flores, and the final speaker will be Sharon Rose. Are you translating?
Yes.
Okay.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es María Flores. Yo soy una de las personas que fui desalojada de los apartamentos de Sirbu.
Hi, my name's Patricia.
Make sure the mic is down. There you go, so we can.
And
thank you.
I'm one of the tenants that was evicted in the Cedarwood evictions in 2006.
Todos ustedes piensan que estuvimos con los brazos cruzados cuando nos desalojaron, pero tuvimos que pasar por muchas cosas muy feas. principalmente en dónde íbamos a vivir, qué íbamos a hacer sin casa. Pero gracias a Dios, los estudiantes y la Unión de Pueblo nos estuvieron ayudando en las buenas y en las malas.
A lot of you may think that we were with our hands tied or our hands crossed when the evictions were occurring, but we weren't. We went through a lot of difficulties, primarily thinking of where would we live, where would we go without any place to go, without a house. Thankfully, we were able to find housing with students, and through the organization Pueblo, we were able to figure out something.
Es una experiencia que a mi peor enemigo se lo puedo desear. Por eso, meses estuvimos viviendo con la casa de los estudiantes, y esto es algo que les puede pasar a muchas personas o a muchas familias. Y yo pido, por favor, que no quiten este servicio por las familias.
This is something that I would never even wish on my worst enemy. It's very difficult to try to find a place to live after being evicted, and this can happen to many more people if we do not keep this service. I request that you keep this service in the community for our families.
Gracias.
Gracias.
I have a question for you, if I could ask.
Una pregunta, por favor. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Why were you being evicted?
Porque estaba siendo desalojada.
Porque según nos iban a arreglar el edificio donde vivíamos, éramos 54 familias las que estábamos viviendo en ese apartamento.
It was, they were restructuring it, and they were going to move in, remodeling the apartment. So there was about 54 people that were,
Condos
54 families that were evicted from those apartments.
So they were making them into condos or something?
No.
For students.
No, they were upgrading them. They're still apartments.
I
And they were
see.
upgrading them and raising the rent.
Thank you.
Sharon Rose. That was the one on Modoc near Las Positas, if I'm remembering correctly. Yep. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and City Council and staff. My name is Sharon Rose. I'm a member of the Rental Housing Roundtable. I work on mobile home housing affordability and also on housing affordability for renters. I think you know that there have been many expensive court battles, especially in the area that I work on, mobile home parks, and it's really hurt our senior citizens and our workforce families to have to come up with attorney fees. Santa Barbara, as you know, is one of the highest cost of living areas in North America. We need more services like Rental Housing Task Force, not fewer. We need to keep people out of court. And as you know, workforce people, seniors, and people with disabilities cannot afford attorneys when disputes arise. I think there could be a fee to offset these costs. And I wanted to share with you, you had a question about did other places have these types of fees. And California Department of Housing and Community Development does have fees on mobile homeowners which are shared with landlords to enforce some of their codes. And other states have passed laws for these fees for mediation services, and that's something California is looking at the state level for mobile home parks, so I'm sure it could be extended to renters. I understand the federal government reduced your grant from CDBG, and I understand that there are funding issues. The federal government is supporting 3 costly wars in the oil territories, coupled with tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy, and this is trickling down to us. It's not all just a shortage of bed tax revenues. We need to pay attention to the federal government and demand accountability. I urge the city to support the task force from the general fund and maybe assign staff to investigate the potential for private-public partnerships.
Wind up, please.
I like the idea of getting the Santa Barbara rental housing property owners engaged, and I feel there's a public responsibility to support this, and I don't think that SB Can and Pueblo can do much more. I work with them both, and I know they're stretched very thin, but I welcome looking into this. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. That concludes public comment on this item. I suggest we maybe discuss this department before going on to library. So any other comments on or suggestions on the Community Development Department, on not just rental housing, but the whole thing? Mr. House.
Well, first, I guess maybe on the general thing, thank you for the presentation for the overall budget proposal, and I tend to think that everything except for this one particular piece makes a lot of sense to me. This one really doesn't, and I'm glad that it's coming up today and that people came to speak to us about it. We do an awful lot in Santa Barbara to support, I mean, government programs all over the nation and the state try to help with tax incentives and everything for people to own homes. And here we have a majority of Santa Barbans who are tenants. And this is the one service that for truly a very nominal cost to the city of Santa Barbara produces a direct service that benefits literally thousands of individuals in our region, which are clearly within our community. And we have the assistance and have had it from Carpinteria and the county for the unincorporated areas. And clearly, this is of tremendous benefit. So I know, Mr. Armstrong, you're scratching real hard with your team to try to make sure you find every little penny here, and it's really important. But these $55,000 or whatever the actual number is, to me, this is where we get that list out and we find some way to make this happen. We just must. And I know that we've been fortunate to have grant funding over the years. Thank goodness for that. But this is something that is a direct service to the community. That saves everyone so much strife and so much heartache and so much money. And public-private partnership, that's what this is. For the investment that we make right here, the small amount, you're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars of pro bono service that's offered as a true partnership. And I do think Mr. DiLoretto has the right idea, though, about this term limit thing that we have for the mediators. It makes no sense at all. I can understand maybe in the beginning there was some fear that some people would become entrenched or something, but that isn't the case. What we really have are people who are truly competent, and the longer they stay with it, the more competent they become. So I don't know what that administrative thing that we need to do is, but that could certainly shave some of the cost off of it, the training part. So I hope that my colleagues will agree with me that this is critically important. It's a very small amount considering the entire budget, and we need to find some other place for it in the general fund and allocate it here.
Ms. Self.
Thank you. How much staff time is dedicated to the ZIRs? They're probably down at this point, but...
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Self. Yes, the amount of full-time equivalents has been dropping over the last several years. We approximately have about 0.75, and what is made up of that time is a staff person who performs the inspections as well as the supervisory support. And this supervisory support is sometimes needed to deal with more complex problems that come up. And also because we now have 2 years of doing a furlough, which realtors were very much concerned about services being available or not being available during the furlough. So at certain peak times, we also pull in other people. But all said together, it's approximately 0.75 of a full-time equivalent.
And how would the salary, wage, and benefits compare to the staff person who operates the rental housing mediating task force?
I think the planning technician is paid less. Andrea's position? I'm not certain of that.
Okay, but
our planning tech position, the one that is the primary,
right,
is a lower paid technician in the planning division.
Okay.
That I can tell you.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Self, somewhat comparable probably to the two part-time positions that we're trying to fund for rental housing mediation. But I have to also acknowledge that we do get revenue from the zoning information report process. So if you were thinking of eliminating that position, we'd also have to offset that by a reduction in our expected revenue.
What do you think what do we charge, $465 for a zoning report?
It's pretty close to full cost recovery on the zoning information report process. So that's kind of almost a self-sustaining portion of the planning division.
Well, if it is self-sustaining, because I don't have all the information yet, unfortunately, but in Carpinteria, a homeowner is charged $120 by a private company to do a zoning information report. And as I've brought up here before, we pay $465 for one in the city of Santa Barbara with no guarantees that it's even correct. Because when you go to sell your home and they catch something that didn't get caught the first time, you're stuck with it. And so if this position could be shifted over, it would be to the mediation task force. Mr. Armstrong's going, where is she going? Okay, if we eliminate the ZIR and take that person's staff time and put it for the 2 part-time equivalents, and we allow our community to benefit by, about a third of the cost for a zoning report. Does that sound good?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Self, trying to understand your premise here. I don't know if you're saying that we no longer require zoning information
No.
reports,
I'm
or
just
we're gonna
saying that we let
contract out.
private individuals do zoning reports. So instead of a homeowner paying $465, they're paying $120. Seems a little high. And but you're saying that sort of pays for the individual who's doing it. But it still seems like a good idea for our homeowners' benefits.
So, Madam
That's
Mayor,
another subject.
and Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, I think if we want to have a conversation about contracting out privately for zoning information reports and the efficiency and effectiveness of that, we'd be prepared to do so, because we think that's a challenge to contract out. We think there's a lot of services that we provide, having access to the archives, timely response, that we think would be challenging. But we could have that conversation.
We'll have that conversation another time. I was hoping we could shift that person over to here, but it doesn't look like that's a possibility.
Right. Correct.
Round and round we go. Yeah, that's a really tough one. I think, can you do some more research about these other groups, like a private partner collaboration with volunteers, to see how we might be able to give a CDBG grant for somebody to do this mediation instead of having it a totally in-house thing? Anyway, I'm throwing lots of things out there. You know, we're all trying to figure out where to nip and tuck. And then I have some unrelated questions, which that last one seemed to be, after all. You mentioned bonds in 2001 and 2003. Can you tell me what projects those were for?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, sorry. I could, but that was a long time ago. But some of the major projects in 2001, I believe a good portion of that, the total combined was about $70 million for the 2 grants. A good portion of the first grant of the bonds, a good portion of that first bond, which was in the low or high $30 million, went to the construction of the Granada Garage, as well as the Granada Theater, and then the 2003 bond. Each of them had their own series of projects, because you have to do that in accordance with law to draw, here's what we're going to spend the money on. So I can get that information to you, the exact number, but it changes over time. Council and the agency board have the ability to pull projects in and out depending on what their priorities are.
Right.
And in the information I send you on a quarterly basis, the quarterly update on our projects, that should have a little bit of that information in there as well, whether it's a bond-funded project or a general fund project.
And
RDA general fund project.
Right. And regarding the stipends to our boards and commissions, it's been brought to my attention, I haven't investigated it, that even if we pay $1 for a stipend, then the individuals who are volunteering their time get to take tax deductions for mileage and for out-of-pocket expenses, not for their time, of course, but just for out of time. So is that something that could be considered, like $1 a year?
I've heard different stories. I have not spoken with an accountant to know, depending on the individual's financial situation, whether or not it has a tax benefit to receive a stipend or not. I do know at one time when the city gave a stipend of $10 a year, there were a number of volunteers throughout the organization, board and commissions, who did not want the $10 because it somehow complicated the situation. So I'm sorry, I'm not really able to give you a specific tax accounting opinion on that.
Right.
I do know that in general, though, what has been felt by the boards and commissions is it does help defray some of the cost that they encounter, be it driving to site visits, maybe paying for child care. It's just a recognition that they are putting time in, week out. And I don't think that the amount in any way really offsets any of their costs. And I've heard mention the tax possible benefit, but I really can't speak to that.
Okay, I'll talk to our CPA and get more information on that. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To the rental task force, it's never easy to think about the city and its mission if we drift in and out of what it is we're supposed to be doing and what our tasks are. I'm a little concerned about outside of our jurisdiction, especially if the funding goes away from Goleta and Carpinteria. What would we do? Are we going to be then responsible for this entire area? Do we limit it to just the residents of the city? That doesn't seem like a practical solution either. I do agree with Mr. House and Mr. DiLoretto's comments about the limits. It seems that when you get somebody that has a level of expertise and dedication that some of these people have, the 2-year limit makes no sense whatsoever. And I do enjoy that it does take some pressure off the court system. Having spent a fair amount of my life and income on attorneys, I'm happy for that on any occasion. I think there's a hybrid approach. I don't think the answer is here. I don't think we have all the information we need. I do think there could be, as the one speaker referred to, there are some people that are not poverty-stricken that get involved in the system. There might be a sliding scale. There may be some opportunities for fee recovery. I don't know why that would be that difficult to explore. Certainly not everybody can afford to do that, but maybe some folks could. So I think that between that and the efforts of the nonprofits that are involved, and this town is a slug of nonprofits, no question about that, that there are opportunities to fundraise and I think also to help out from the city's fund itself. I don't know where this money is supposed to come from. That would be a question for Mr. Armstrong. But I do think it's a worthwhile thing, and I do think anything that keeps people out of the attorney's office and out of courtrooms and able to be in their housing in a reasonable and cooperative way is a positive. So I'd like to support this, but I'd like to support this with some more information with some more creative ideas on funding and cooperation. And I'd like some answers as far as jurisdictions are concerned. Thank you.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'll start with my non-rental housing question, and that is I'm looking at the zoning ordinance enforcement page and the zoning enforcement cases received and closed, and it looks like we're kind of steady as she goes. There's we received 280 last year and closed 360. Looks pretty good. Yet I'm hearing other than that on the ground. Can you give us a little summary of the status of zoning enforcement at this point?
Yes, Madam Mayor and Councilmember White. The reason that this doesn't tell the story that we've been telling is this begins with actual fiscal year 2010. When you compare our activity levels in enforcement in 2009 to 2010 and this last year, that's where you see a dramatic decrease. At the time, the good years, 2008, 2009, we had approximately 2.5 FTEs doing enforcement, including part-time hourly position. The number of letters sent and number of cases closed since the good years is down about 40%. So what you're seeing reported in your P3s for just this snapshot, we've been able to maintain, and this is something that I think is important for everyone to realize, and I did have questions along these lines at the Planning Commission. We still do have an enforcement program. We still are working on sign complaints, working with building and safety on illegal unit measures that they take the lead, but we work on that. Illegal home occupation situations, storage. So we still have an active enforcement program, but just at a much reduced level. So these numbers reflect that reduced level that we've had the last 2 years. Compared to 2 years prior, it's about 40% down.
And so we have how many complaints do we have on file? Do you have that information handy? And if not, then could you get that to us at some point in the future?
What I'll be providing you with is a backlog. The zoning enforcement program has traditionally had what we refer to as a backlog. Yep. We have broken the backlog down into different priorities depending on the nature of the violation, and we're still working with our backlog. Whereas again, in 2009, it was about the first time we almost didn't have a backlog. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And that just is, it's one of those areas that kind of reminds me of our discussions about the jail, where you end up in this sort of consequence-less system. And that is really, it hurts us in a bunch of different ways when we're trying to keep a city great under tough times. And of course, then getting on to the mediation issue, I always, when I'm talking with folks and engaging with folks about budget, and of course the comment that we inevitably hear is, don't cut this really important program. And my counter is often, it says, okay, we're not going to cut this. What do we cut? Where do you find that $55,000? And I appreciate Ms. Self's making a real pitch at it. I'm going, here's a place to cut, and then you open the box and you find, of course, that staff has really looked hard, and it's not just like they've just willy-nilly done things, but have been really staring hard at this as we've cut this organization back, or you folks, and now I'm having joined on my second year. So I see that every one of these $55,000 is really been hard studied, and I have a great deal of respect for your team in what you're putting forward in that way. And I think it's up to us, up to this community, to look to the stakeholders, and this isn't going to go away anytime soon. I mean, we're hoping it's going to go away. We stopped going into free fall. We're at least we're maintaining altitude this year. That's great. Hopefully that's the way it stays. But going forward, the collaborations on programs like this really need to come out of each stakeholding section. And that's where, I'm a member of the Rental Property Association. I can tell you I would lobby for that association to put up a fair share. I would lobby for the big landlords. There, just again, a few letters. You start doing too many solicitations, and you're using up your time soliciting rather than doing the work. but that a partnership emerge out of this, that the city puts in something, but that the stakeholders are putting in something too. The Fund for Santa Barbara, for example. And there is $5,000 sitting in a few of those pockets to put their money where their real intentions are. And we had the Isla Vista union person here, and she mentioned the president of the landlord association out there. It's got to be there. And so even if we're hearing one-time money this year, we're sucking one-time money out to keep this organization going one more time, and you just keep doing that. And we're also deferring capital improvements. We're still not taking care of our buildings the way we should. So I say all of this, and we're coming back to this little $55,000 investment. But we need to find a way for the common stakeholders to be pitching in the fees. I appreciate that should be, from each according to his or her ability is part of what can make this work. Secondly, the term limits should not apply clearly to these folks. You're dedicated, you're seasoned, you're committed. So I certainly endorse that part of it. And I want to keep this going, and I want some help from the private sector to make it happen.
Thank you. I see Ms. Selfslide on. I'm going to chime in first since you already spoke for a little bit. On the non-rental housing mediation task force items, first, thank you for your presentation. And, the way I look at the staffing over time as it's gone down, it would be good to start monitoring the additional time it takes to get certain things accomplished. When, the housing market is going to turn around at some point. So when things are slow, having less staff at the counter or whatever it is, could fit fine. But when it does turn around, and whether it's a new homeowner or a renovation of something or a new project, when we lag on our end, that has an negative economic output on the public, to the public and to the cities as a whole. And I hear time and again from people throughout the housing community, whether they're owners or renters or whatever, that time is money. So when it takes longer on our part to get something accomplished, that's costing them money. And so I think we have to be cognizant of that and see what we can do to monitor that, because hopefully, I think you're probably at the absolute bare bottom, especially with getting rid of the half-time other planner position. But it would be good to quantify that as much as you can, because when things do turn around, we want to be ready. And especially, as you said, Mr. Casey, when you got on board, that was a big initiative. I wasn't with the city at that time, but I kind of remember these talks, and I know Mr. House does, and I believe Mr. White, you were on the Planning Commission, both of you then, about the customer service aspect of it, and that's really important to our constituents as well, and getting consistent feedback. I still get that. I went to one, depends on who you get at the counter. I don't like hearing that. I want to make sure that whoever you see at the counter, you're going to get the same information. And so we need to make sure that stays consistent. So I'll be looking at that over time. But I appreciate and agree the way you try to restructure here, especially making sure that the staff hearing officer process is still involved. So that was good. That clarification was good. When you said earlier about the restorative policing and program and come back in 2 weeks so you can nail down the program, I'm hoping that you're talking with some of the homeless social service providers on the street outreach component to that, because that's still a question mark in my mind of who are these individuals? Are they hourly staff of the police department? Do we put an RFP out to different nonprofits? We're just talking about rental housing mediation of, having different stakeholders be part of a bigger program. And we need to, so I hope part of your conversations in, quote, nailing this down is not just internal, but it does include some conversations with some experts out there who've been doing this kind of work for a very long time and seeing what could work or what maybe not work, or at least what to consider in an RFP, assuming this moves forward. So I look forward to that conversation in a couple of weeks. On the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, first off, thank you everyone for your emails and for coming today. Your voice is very important for us to hear during these budget hearings, and it makes a big difference. I think the issue about the term limit is an easy one. That's a resolution change that the clerk's office can, unless there's something in the charter that says it can only be, but I don't think this is one of those charter boards that require a vote of the people to change the term limit. So I think that's an administrative thing that could probably come back. And uh-oh. Well, so much for that. Mr. Wiley.
No, Madam Mayor, I just thought I'd maybe resolve it. The resolution, and it's just a council resolution, it's very clear. It's only a matter of policy.
Right.
Always
Any
has
given
been
Tuesday.
Just a matter of council policy.
Right. So we can change. So I was right. That's good. Thank you. Thank you. So that's something I think can come back and we can clarify that, and especially if that's an extra cost. I have to say, whoever's training all of you members are doing a great job in terms of bringing ideas. I would suggest one of the things, this is a 35-year-old program, and to have a sort of 6 weeks notice that it's going to completely end, and it's been a successful program for so much time, really doesn't sit well with me. And what I would suggest to my colleagues is perhaps see if we could put, whether it's either the two numbers that came to my mind was either the 55,000 or 68,000 seemed to be what the mediation task force could normally do within the city of Santa Barbara, and then expand it to either the county or the city of Carpinteria if and when they decide to put in money. Because I want to acknowledge something Councilmember White's saying over and over again of doing our fair share and not going beyond our fair share in different parts of the South Coast if there's not proportional assistance. So I'm more than happy to have this continue as it has been in the past, so long as those other entities are participating. But if they're not, and we don't know the answer to that, then we should really just keep it within the city of Santa Barbara limits. I remember when city of Goleta was looking at doing their own program, and so decided not to fund this program. And at that point, I think that's when we went to the Rental Housing Property Owners Association and asked if they would help. And at that point, they said no. But I think this is different. This is talking about elimination of the task force. This isn't just about a reduction of funding. This is much different. So I would suggest going back to them as was suggested before. But it may be worth seeing if we can find, maybe I'll put the $55,000 number as a plug number, because we're going to come back with the full budget thing. Try to see if we can find $55,000, but with the caveat that we come back in 6 months. So at the 6-month budget review, it gives enough time to figure out what are the options here. I mean, we've got a bunch of mediators. There's got to be some solution out here somewhere to figure out what can we do in 6 months and bringing in other people. But at least that way, the program can move forward without being threatened of completely cut off, July 1st. But we come back in 6 months, look at the hybrid options, and then, see what we want to do in those next 6 months. That would be my suggestion on how we can move forward. I just think this very sudden kind of shift, and I appreciate why. It had to do with the funding source and where it came from, and I actually, Mr. Armstrong, it was right of you not to put it in this budget because this is a policy decision for the council of using general fund money, and so that's what we're having up here. So don't feel bad. I know it was a tough decision, but I appreciate that is what was set before us. So that would be my suggestion to my colleagues if they want to try it out. We're not setting it in stone today. It would just be when the final direction budget hearing comes forward. It'll be on the list of things, and we would make a determination at that point of whether to keep the 55 or put another number in there or something. But I think that might be the way to go. That would be my suggestion. Ms. Self and then Mr. House.
I think the 6 months is a good idea, not 6 weeks for these people. It gives time for a transition. And I suggest plugging in $28,000 for 6 weeks. That way, the other stakeholders know we're very serious that this program has an end game. And obviously, the nonprofits can do it less expensive than we are. And so that would be a benefit. They wouldn't have to spend that for half a year. Also, I remember, correct me, I've got another idea. La Entrada has funds set aside, and it was, I know we use some for the warming center for homeless. Since this could be construed as keeping people from being homeless, could, a portion of that be used for this program? We've heard people talk about that, and some people, they don't speak English, they don't know the system, and so
I was going to
here he
answer
comes
before
again.
the city attorney hopped up. My first reaction, we'll see if it's the same as Mr. Wiley's, is that that was for the loss of low-cost visitors serving overnight accommodations, and so the way we've been using that interest income is kind of similar, kind of overnight short-term stay, and then it might be a little bit stretched with kind of the Coastal Commission's having
come on, we
implemented
stretch
that
a lot
measure.
of things.
Well, Madam Mayor, yes, I was going to pretty much give the same answer. As we've said a couple times, there really was not much detail on this exaction from the Entrada project, but the one detail was to somehow preserve or offer affordable overnight accommodation. So the one line we've drawn on this pretty consistently is to distinguish between overnight accommodations and long-term housing. And I think in this case we're probably talking about long-term.
It's too much of a stretch, yeah. Okay, well, if we could maybe just plug in a lower number for a 6-month period, I think it would be easier to get us on board, and that will give you time to get together with people and work at it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Self, for trying to figure out, you're trying. It's good. No, it is good. I appreciate the intent. Mr. House.
Just very briefly, I support your suggestion, Madam Mayor, and I think that one of the things that would be, it's essential to buy enough time for the organizations that benefit and the jurisdictions that have an interest in this to really rally and to put their, we need a rental housing mediation task force to deal with the rental housing mediation task force issue. We really do, in a way, need to put this into a stakeholder kind of a conference of some sort, because it's essential that this service continue. This is not an option. I don't see this as an optional service. We are a city of renters, and this particular kind of service is a direct service to those whom we are here to serve. And the small amount that it costs the city of Santa Barbara to provide an invaluable service to those who otherwise cannot afford it, and a mutual service to the land owners or the property owners themselves. So this is the only one of these that's evenly balanced. It's not an advocacy for one or the other side. This is something that is essential. It's not an option to see this go away. So buy some time to get the groups together to look for additional sources of funding. But I will remind my colleagues that this is already a public-private partnership with a tremendous subsidy from the private sector in the form of the time that's being donated. This is, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of time that's being given generously, and then we're providing sort of a matching fund component to it. So it's not one of those optional things. I think we need to stand up for the renters of the city of Santa Barbara, and one day it could be you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not on that topic, but one that has really struck me the other day in our meeting with our, and it's got one of those magnificent long names, but it's basically the Homelessness Subcommittee. And the topic came up of which I sort of struck a chord with me was, we need someone like the gang task force coordinator to be working on homelessness. And here we have in the community development budget two people in management who are spending significant chunks of their time and really helping us problem solve in this area. So it's just, it's kind of like out of the corner of our eye that this is going on, and yet this is, and some of the best work is coming out of the community development. And so it's not, it's accidental. It feels like, okay, these people, we've got some people who can handle this. Let's put them, stick them in there and make them do this work, and which they're doing willingly, and we're seeing some positive results out of it. But it does feel to me like we're patching. This is another patch that we're performing right now as we try and get a handle on homelessness, and somehow that needs to become its own entity. And I'm not sure just where it would go, but it just struck me in that meeting that this was a patch job that was going on, and that we weren't. And thank goodness for that patch, by the way. I really appreciate that. I think it's a positive piece, besides obviously all the law enforcement and the restorative policing and all that's going on. But somehow we need to get that focused as its own entity. And I thought that was a great idea that emerged out of that meeting the other day. And it's not quite being stated in this budget as that service.
Thank you for acknowledging that. It sounds like there's consensus to do something and not just cut things off July 1st. The number is still a question, and maybe that number we decide at the budget hearing, or do we want to decide on a number now? There was one other thing I wanted to mention, though, about it. In the book on G65, your P3s are practically identical between this year and next year, and I have a feeling that is really not going to be the case if the way it's being proposed with the elimination of the task force. So, I was just saying, wait a minute, you can't measure the same thing with the dramatically different program. So, I caught that. Mr. Armstrong, do you want a number right now, or how do you want to move forward with the rental housing?
Definitely, when we come back, when you're in your deliberations, we will have this as one of the issues. If there's 4 of you that want to give me direction now on a number. What I'm hearing is that it seems to be, and I didn't count that much because I didn't hear all of you, that I heard some sentiment that we should at least continue the program for 6 months and explore options, and then the question is really what would the number be,
right,
whether you fund it for the full year or you fund it for 6 months.
Well, if we want, I can plug in 50,000 as a number, knowing that will probably change. If we want to just start putting something there, I think that would be, it's a little even less than what the 55,000 was, just to start there.
Would that be contingent on the other regions chiming in? Or?
That would be just for the city of Santa Barbara. That would be my suggestion is we wouldn't provide the services outside the city unless we got funding from those entities. So that would be on top of the 8 and the 25,000 would be separate, because that's not our decision to make in terms of putting money in the general fund. So it would be 50,000 City of Santa Barbara only, to review after 6 months to see if we can, if there's other alternatives that would fund it beyond general fund subsidy. That would be my suggestion. And like I said, that number can change coming back on it's just a plug number.
We can use that as a plug number, and then when we come back for final decisions, you can then modify it.
Go up or go down.
Madam Mayor, I would hope that staff would help us come up with a number that is meaningful, not just one we just make up here. So help us understand what we get for the money when it comes back for a decision, and what would be meaningful to help continue the service while we look for and work with the community for additional support somehow or another. But we need some advice from you as to whether that number's too little or too much. We just don't know.
Why don't we when we come back for your decision making, we'll bring you what it would take to keep the program at the service level that it now has for let's assume that we don't get the funding from the outside. If not, we'll plug that back in. But we'll tell you what it would take to keep the program for an entire year or for just 6 months, and then you can decide at that point, do you want to fund it for 6 months or the full year?
Okay. That sounds like a way to go. Okay. Great. So, see, look, that worked. That was good. That's progress. 2 hours. Do we want to take a break before library? Just nope. No. Yes. Uh-oh.
But I don't want to have a blackboard here. So.
I'm going to stay here, and they're going to change around, and I'll just make you take a quick. Go get coffee. Thank you. Ms. Macias.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Irene Macias, Library Director, and I'm pleased to present the library's recommended budget for the fiscal year 2012. I now have a full management team. I've recently hired 2 new library services managers. Roger Hiles to my right, has been on board since December. He is going to be presenting the general fund budget, and Scott Love actually arrived after we created the budget, so both of them have just jumped in and worked with the presentation. They almost had to be here on their own because I've been serving on a jury. I fortunately am off today. And pleased
Love
to be
how you
here.
say you're here and you're off today, but that's sorry, that's
Off jury duty.
off jury duty today. Okay.
I have 2 jobs the last 2 months. Okay, so I am going to start the presentation and give an overview of the library department as a whole, and then Roger will focus in on his area of responsibility, the general fund, and go over the various aspects of that, and then Scott will wind up with the county library fund. This is our organization chart. Roger is now overseeing all of the central library and also the centralized functions of technical services and automation, all the back of house operations. And Scott Love is overseeing the branch libraries and is responsible for the collection for all the libraries. We do have 5 programs in 2 funds, and we are now at 38.5 FTEs. There are 2 funds in the library department. The general fund supports the 2 city libraries, Central and East Side. The county library fund supports the other branches, which are the 4 libraries you see there, and 2 satellite units, Los Olivos and Santa Ynez, which are very tiny. I do always like to remind the council that the library system is a member of the Black Gold Cooperative Library System. It's a robust cooperative where there are 5 member jurisdictions, and we cooperate in sharing an online catalog, in sharing the cataloging of our materials, and we share our resources. We have a delivery system that moves back and forth from San Luis Obispo County down to Blanchard Santa Paula Library. So the resource sharing allows us to share nearly 1 million items. The library department has 5 programs. There are 3 in the general fund. Roger and Scott will talk a little bit more detail about each of these in their part of the presentation. And here we have a summary of the total budget by fund. You can see that the general fund is substantially larger than the county library fund, 58% to 42%, and even within the county library fund, the Goleta Library's share of that is 64% versus the small branches, which are 35%. This chart shows the appropriation by major object. Salaries and benefits make up the greatest part at 62%, and actually that is down about 8% from last year and reflects the continuing reduction in positions that we've had due to budget issues. Supplies and services are pretty steady at 16%, and allocated costs have gone up somewhat, and that will be discussed in the 2 fund details. I like to call out the book acquisitions percentage because when you look at our entire operation, it's such a small amount. It has shrunk over the last decade substantially, yet it's why people come to the library for the most part. And here we have the appropriations by numbers. Just want to call out a couple things. First of all, salaries and benefits are down substantially, again reflecting the reduction in the number of staff. I do want to say that we have quite a lot of hourly employees, but even that has been reduced. Last year we used 50,000 hours of hourly staff, and we're scheduled to use 46,000 hours in the coming year. Again, this is the entire library department, and I just want to also point out that our book budget is at $418,000 next year. When you look at the actuals for 2009 and 2010, we actually had budgeted more, but were worried as we were trying to save money and didn't spend all of the budgets, even though we had appropriated more. The transfers out there is the money that's scheduled for the FMS replacement. And here is a bar chart that shows the reduction in our budget from $6.2 million to $5.8 in the coming year. And the reason it's going down again is that the library department receives funding from the state of California and the county of Santa Barbara. So even though the city's general fund subsidy is at a status quo level for next year, there are potential reductions that are pretty significant to our department. And again, this is for the entire library department. And so you can see the state of California has proposed the elimination of the public library fund, which is just a general grant for operations, and the adult literacy program, which is a wonderful program that for the most part uses volunteers to help people who want to learn to read. Even if the funding is eliminated, we won't eliminate the program. We're planning to make reductions elsewhere just because we feel it's such an important program. And then secondly, the county of Santa Barbara, which contributes about $1.5 million to our system annually, is slated to make a reduction in their per capita contribution of $15,000. So the reduction to the system would be $223,000. None of these things are decided, but we have built our budget around these assumptions. So the total loss to the system would be about $346,000. I want to talk about the Black Gold Cooperative Library System again, because they also are recipients of state funding, and so any financial impact to them really is a financial impact to each of the library jurisdictions. So Black Gold is actually established by the California Library Systems Act, which created about 15 library systems throughout the state, encouraging libraries to cooperate and resource share. Currently, Black Gold receives $113,000 from the state. That's slated to go away. There's another fund called transaction-based reimbursement, and again, they encourage libraries to loan to each other, so libraries get a reimbursement for each item they loan outside their jurisdiction, also slated to go away. So the total reduction for Black Gold would be $420,000, and again, that's for the 5 jurisdictions in the system. Because all these jurisdictions are feeling tremendous budget pressure, Black Gold is planning to balance its budget by using reserves, by making reductions, which will include our online databases, and we are also proposing an increase in a fee, and Roger will talk about that later. So in the coming year, we will use our transaction-based reimbursements one more year because we use them in arrears, but the following year after that, Black Gold will again have serious financial issues. And again, Black Gold members contribute on a pro rata basis and then receive state funding. So if the state funding goes away, it means each of the members will have to increase its contribution. This chart just shows the reduction in positions from 2009 to 2012, and that's a 28% reduction. And then I wanted to just review the service level changes that we've experienced from 2009 to this year. Central Library is now open 49 hours a week as we're closed on Mondays. Eastside Library reduced from 45 to 39. If you look at the average of our book budget in the decade prior to 2009, and compare it to the last 3 years, we've had a 26% reduction. We've also eliminated 2 of our online database subscriptions, and we canceled live homework help. We've also closed a public service desk at the Central Library. We've made a number of reductions to youth services and reference, including a reduced outreach for youth literacy, reduced liaisoning with other youth organizations. Reference, we've eliminated the Santa Barbara Reads program. You recall we eliminated our bookmobile a couple of years ago, and this year the library is closed 10 years, 10 years, it seems like it, 10 days, due to employee furloughs. And we've also reduced our custodial service. Just to review a few of the major changes in the coming year, we are going to cancel another 7 of the remaining 10 online databases. We're looking to streamline and increase our efficiency by asking our library users to help us out by checking out their own materials. We're upgrading the stations at the Central Library to handle more functions, such as collecting fines and fees. We're also introducing self-check at the Eastside Library and at the Goleta Library. We are looking at some reductions in branch hours in the county-funded branches. And the good news is that Central and Eastside Libraries will be open in December should there be a furlough, and that is through additional funds provided to be open during the 8 days that we would have been closed. And so I think you can see the familiar library doors with all the signs announcing that we were closed. Just wanted to review some of the achievements for this year. We have now introduced ebooks. They're very popular. We have classes to teach the public how to download. We introduced the service in August of 2010, and so far there are 2,300 ebooks in the collection. And our system has had 12,000 checkouts just since August. We now have a mobile catalog, so it makes, if you have a smartphone, you can easily access the catalog, and you can even send text information to yourself. We introduced a very popular volunteer program, one-to-one computer coaching. We had so many people coming to the library looking to use the computers who had never done so before. They want to apply for unemployment or upgrade their or create a resume, and they had no computer skills. So we actually put together this volunteer program, and someone can sign up for a half an hour or an hour of time and be helped individually. We also have introduced e-commerce so that our users don't have to come to the library to pay their fines. They can pay them online. We received a national award for our Dia de los Niños celebration, and I do want to commend Oscar Flores, our youth services a staff member who puts his heart into this event, and it was very rewarding to be nationally recognized in the library community. Our adult literacy program also received the Vision and Task Service Award, and that's for working with adults who have dyslexia. And this morning, we have city workers in the Faulkner galleries working to upgrade the walls so that the gallery space will be attractive again. That concludes my portion of the presentation, and now Roger will present the general fund.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, as stated, I'm Roger Hiles, Library Services Manager, and this is a brief overview of the general fund budget for the library programs. The general fund programs are administration, public services, which includes reference, youth services, and patron services. Those are our public-facing services, the sort of thing you would see when you come into the building. Support services, the behind-the-scenes operations that purchase and catalog books. As shown, we've had a number of years of reductions in salaries. We've lost one. We're eliminating one position this year, and we are also shifting our custodial function to Public Works, and that you see in the reduction in the salaries line and the increase in the allocated costs line. You also see our book acquisitions money down again this year. It's the pie chart showing those same numbers. Again, allocated costs, growing share. We've seen a $500,000 or 12.3% reduction in general fund appropriations over the last 4 years, and a 15% reduction in staffing. Our revenue funds this year show a big drop, an anticipated large drop in the intergovernmental funds. As stated, the state and county are projecting to reduce their contributions to us by about $175,000. It's about $100,000 from the county and about $75,000 from the state. And there's a pie chart showing that. Capital projects at the Central Library Entity site include the Central Library reorganization. We anticipate a final design by the end of this year and in beginning of construction next year. That will be for the move of the Children's Library to the lower floor, as well as some changes on the main level. Library Plaza project, a redevelopment agency project, of course, will take place outside our facility, and a project kickoff meeting is scheduled for this month. The fee increase that we're recommending is to the reserve fee. It's a 50-cent increase recommended to help offset the costs that the Black Gold Consortium is going to be passing on to us due to their budget cuts from the state. This fee will be paid by patrons who want to reserve a book that's currently checked out by another patron or is housed at another facility and has to be sent to them. One complication is that since the Black Gold Consortium runs our automation system, if a majority of Black Gold jurisdictions vote to increase the fee and we do not follow suit, we'll have to manually change the fee every time we do this, and we do this about 100,000 times a year. Our key operational or staffing changes this year include elimination of the vacant library assistant 1 position and the transfer of the 2 custodial positions in the custodial function to Public Works. Our adult literacy coordinator position is being reclassified as a library services coordinator to have broad development responsibilities. This is part of our aggressive push to raise more money for library operations and for our capital projects. Also, due to our reorganization as we grow smaller in staff, we are combining some duplicate lines in public services and support services as our operations consolidate. Our key performance objectives include the fundraising campaign for the new children's library, and you see some concept work that we've been shared, that the designers have shared with us. A key goal is to maintain circulation at 650,000. It was well over 100,000 higher than that, but we've lost a day of service now with being closed on Mondays. And we are, one of our goals is to stem the loss and keep it at that level. We're going to be using a grant-funded library collection development tool called Collection HQ that will help us target our purchases, even with a smaller book budget. So hopefully we can keep people interested, keep them coming in, keep them checking out books. We want to increase our volunteer hours to 10,500 and implement the improved self-check machines that were mentioned earlier and our book security system. We also want to implement vendor-supplied cataloging and processing for purchasing materials in our technical services unit, and this will, we hope, both save money and save time. And that concludes our general fund account.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Scott Love, the other new library services manager, and I'll be walking you through the County Library Fund. It's important to note that County Library Fund is funded wholly by the County of Santa Barbara through their per capita funding and the individual cities, some of the individual cities that are served by these branches, and through bequests and donations. No City of Santa Barbara monies are used in this fund. The County of Santa Barbara contracts with the city to provide the service, and the city charges a 9% fee for administering the funds. The County Library Fund has two programs, Small Branch and the Goleta Library. So the Carpinteria Library, we have provided on each of the branch slides some of the major funding sources for fiscal year 2012. With the small branches, their most significant funding comes from the county per capita. And again, that's projected to be reduced by 15% this year. Montecito Library is in an unincorporated area, so it receives no intergovernmental funding other than the county per capita, so they'll be seeing a significant reduction to their only government source. This would be due primarily this year only getting the county per capita because of the slated elimination of the state's PLF funding. Solvang Library, the City of Solvang provides a significant amount of funding here to help them out. It also, they operate the Santa Ynez and Los Olivos satellite facilities. Those are only open 3 hours every Saturday and are run by volunteers only. They provide no computer services, no programming, no reference services. Goleta Library is a separate program, or separate fund, separate program. And they receive a significant amount of funding from the parcel tax that Goleta has. Also this year, the city of Goleta will be helping out the funding with developer fees. And the Friends of the Library help significantly with the operation of that branch. Here's the revenues over the 4 years. This does show the county per capita money is listed here and under fees and services, so you can see that's going down. What isn't really shown here is there's a different way of accounting. And this year, under the fees and services, the 9% admin fee that the City of Santa Barbara charges, or the library charges, is still in the 2012 budget. So in previous years, 2011 and before, it was not in there. So that money shows a little bit higher than it normally was. You also would notice in here the donation and library gift funds. Much of that money is used to help run the operation hours of the branch libraries. So there's been a large increase since 2009 in that area. Lastly, the state PLF grant, which this year was a little over 48,000, is slated to be eliminated. This is just showing a pie chart of the same revenues. 73% are the fees and services. Most of that money is, again, the county per capita and some of the intergovernmental money from the other jurisdictions. Here's our appropriation chart. This shows the reduction in salaries and benefits over the 4 years. This also shows you finally in here the administrative fee in fiscal year 2012. Again, that's something we've always charged. It was just taken off of the top and not shown in the budget previously. We're trying to be more transparent, especially with dealing with the other jurisdictions, so they can see where the monies are coming out. So this year it shows as $108,000. Previous years it would have been more than that, because this year it is slated for a 15% reduction, which would affect even our admin fee. Here shows we have a 33.4% reduction in staffing over the last 4 years if we go with the proposed schedule. So what do all these reductions in county per capita and PLF mean to the branches? It's pretty significant. You see large cuts at Solvang and Carpinteria Library. These hours aren't final. Ultimately, they will be dependent on the state PLF grant and the county per capita. Also, the County of Santa Barbara is looking for additional funding from other sources, be friends, donations, wherever they can, to try to help mitigate the severe losses at some of the libraries. City of Goleta isn't showing a reduction here because of the developer fees and the funding from the Friends Group that helps keep the library open on Mondays. So City of Goleta is being helped there. Montecito shows only a small reduction, and that's assuming a large amount of bequest and donation dollars are used for the operating hours of the branch. It's also important to note, if you look at the bottom in here, going back to 2009, for the whole system, that's a 25% cut for the small branches and Goleta. So this year we're hoping to, or we will be implementing self-check and improve book security at Goleta to help with efficiency there. We'll be replacing older computers. And at the Carpinteria Library, the City of Carpinteria and the Friends of the Carpinteria Library have donated monies to help replace and augment the number of computers that we have at that facility. Small branches, just a highlight on this, we are hoping to maintain circulation at 200,000 at the small branches. This is a lower number than previous years, but it's based on the fact that we are proposing the hour reductions for the facilities. Goleta, on the other hand, since there is not a reduction, we're hoping to increase the circulation by 600,000 or to 600,000. This is due to the fact that there aren't a reduction in hours and the fact that the library has shown increased activity every year. And that concludes our presentation, and we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I don't see any public comment speakers. Okay. Any questions? Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What's the hour comparison between what is an FTE? How many hours is an FTE?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, an FTE is one full-time person.
I understand that, but I'm just trying to sort of make apples to apples out of the temporaries versus the hourly employees versus the FTEs.
How many
40 times? How many weeks do we expect to get out of them?
Oh.
Rule of thumb is 2,080 hours if somebody worked every day. A typical employee works approximately 1,800 productive hours a year.
Okay, so a couple thousand. Okay, and then the live homework help. What was that?
That was a service that the library subscribed to. It's actually a nationwide company that has tutors who are usually teachers, and they are online, and students can log in and get homework help, whether they have trouble understanding a math problem or need to compose a paragraph. There are actually tutors that conduct a live chat conversation and help them with their homework. And this was geared towards students in 4th grade to 10th. It was pretty expensive. It was $38,000 a year. And we did initially subscribe through a grant from the California State Library. And then it was a 3-year grant. And the last year we had to pay full freight. I think we paid it 1 year and then canceled.
Did you have any record of how many hours of?
Yes, it was really difficult to publicize, and ultimately, it was costing us probably $18 to $20 for each session.
And then on the black gold, I didn't quite understand the financing of that or the implications of its. I was hearing that you're going to be using reserves, or not you, but the system will be using reserves next year to fund itself, and that there's proposed to be a 50-cent per transaction increase next year. Are those two of the basic ingredients? Am I getting that right?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember White. The Santa Barbara Public Library is one of the members of Black Gold, so I sit on the administrative council or the board of Black Gold, and we cooperate to levy our resources and share them as much as possible. Because of the cuts from the state, the elimination of those funds would have caused each member's contribution to increase in order to support the services. So because the delivery service is what the Black Gold Cooperative was using, they were using the state monies to fund the delivery service. We thought we would increase the cost of requesting an item, because when you request an item, it travels through the delivery service, and that would partially offset the dollars that would be lost to Black Gold.
So we're anticipating next year, if all of this were to go forward, that the Black Gold system would survive another year with the 50-cent per transaction increase.
Correct.
And the use of reserves.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Youth services, I think that was the other question, and I didn't know what would those?
Youth services, we have quite a number of services that we provide to the youth in the community. For the most part, they come to the library, and we have a summer reading program. We have book clubs for kids, and we provide a number of programs, whether they're library staff created programs, or we bring in storytellers and musicians and entertainers that have a literary aspect to them. So we also go out into the community, and we have staff members who go to preschools and to schools and do story times or talk about library services and try to encourage children to get a library card and to use the library.
And those are refresh my memory.
We are doing less of that.
Just less, some,
less of
but
that.
not. But so just not as much. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Ms. Macias. How are you? Okay, so Mr. White asked about live homework. Generally, from the youth point of view, do we get an influx in the libraries in the afternoon after school's out, 4 to 6, 3 to 5, whatever?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes, we do, and it's different amounts at the various libraries. The East Side Library gets jammed as soon as school lets out. Carpinteria Library also, Goleta Library. The Central Library does get students, but not in as high a proportion as at the other branch libraries.
Okay, here's a bombshell for you. If we wanted to leave or could reopen our libraries Monday afternoons, any figure on what that might cost additionally? And I mean, I don't even know if it's staffing-wise possible, but
we did look at some options, and one of them was looking at the East Side Library. We felt that we could add 5 hours on Mondays at a cost of about $21,000. That would include staff members and supplies and utilities. I don't believe we've looked at a per hour amount at the Central Library. I know that Roger Hiles did work up some numbers for keeping the Central Library open all day on Monday. Roger, could you address that?
We did look at restoring the full service on Monday, and it would be approximately $238,000. But an afternoon we'd have to cost it out because it would be similar to Sunday, but probably with more services because we can't do two light service days in a row. I don't believe a lot of our Sunday operations depend on Tuesday coming in and cleaning it up. So.
And if we were going to prioritize, would East Side Library would be first, downtown would be second? I'm extrapolating here from what you said. Third, fourth, fifth?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, that's a difficult question because I think each community values its library. I believe if you're looking to address the issue of students needing to use the library after school, I think East Side is a better bet because of the tons of kids that show up there.
That's great. So that's first, but then let's keep going here. Downtown? Would that take a little looking into?
We could look at, I can't really give you a dollar amount.
Okay.
It's complicated because we are closed on Mondays, all the full-time staff work Tuesday through Saturday.
Right.
If we had to open on Mondays, then we'd have to move some staff to the Monday, then we'd have some gaps on the Saturday, and we saved, I believe, $288,000 by closing on Mondays and shifting the staff from Tuesday through Saturday. And even though we could open up a few hours, what happens is whenever you're open and busy, materials come in and go out and they start stacking up. So you have to have the back of house activities. You have to have people that take them out of the bags that are coming from other libraries, put books back into bags, send them out to other libraries. So there's a lot of activity that has to go on behind the scenes in order to support what you see when you see someone at the desk helping you.
I understand. I knew it wasn't going to be a simple answer, but I think people do remark on that closure, and I'm just trying to take a step forward if it's possible to do that. I think the furlough day opening is terrific at the end of the year. Thank you. Just one more. The e-books. How does the e-book work do I bring my Kindle down and I plug in? Just explain if you could briefly.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes, it doesn't work with all readers. There are a number of readers that our service does support. Our service, it's a paid subscription, and as I said, there are about 2,300 titles. It works with the Sony Nook. It works with...
But once it gets on my machine, is it only there for 2 weeks, or
yes.
It's got a time, it's got a clock on it, as it were?
Kindle coverage is coming.
Okay, and that costs, is that free, like taking a book out of the library?
That is one of the subscriptions that we share through this Black Gold cooperative system. The total cost to Black Gold is, I believe, $70,000 for a year. Our Santa Barbara Public Library system share is $22,000. It's a free service.
Right, but I got to understand. Is there any benefit in people donating books from the public to the library? Does that help or hinder? Is it like, oh my God, look, we got this thing
again? It depends on what the donation is. We've actually been overwhelmed, and it takes a lot of staff time to pick through and decide what's worth adding or not.
Right.
Oftentimes people bring in encyclopedias that are from the 1960s, so then it just becomes a workload issue to dispose of them or to deal with them.
So should we encourage people to do that? Or
I would encourage them to donate money to purchase new materials.
Okay, I'll stop dumping books into the thing there on Anacapa Street?
We do have book sales and have one coming up, I believe, this month, and we generally realize about $5,000 to $7,000 at these sales.
And is that from donated books or just the books that the library is getting rid of?
Both.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I think opening up in December is going to be a big boost. That was the one thing during the furlough period that I heard in terms of, everything else they were willing to wait till January, but it was the library closure, which was the big one. So I appreciate figuring that out. I think
very gratifying to hear.
Yeah. Anything else? I think that covers it for this item. We have 2 closed sessions, if you could read those.
Item 2, conference with labor negotiator, and item 3, conference with real property negotiators regarding 319 West Haley Street.
Okay. And we'll be adjourning from closed session. Thank you.